Welcome to PolitFlix, episode 14. And today what we're looking at are the two Thomas Crown Affair versions. There was one made with Steve McQueen, and there was one made with Pierce Brosnan. We'll be looking at those two. There's also The Saint from 1997 and Maverick from 1994, like probably in a different order to that. The idea being that in each case you are looking at gentlemen thieves, lovable rogues, and each is a pretty self-contained, harmless throwaway fantasy. But once again, if you look at the bigger picture in terms of the making, in terms of their contribution and legacy and so on, and what they reflect at the time, there's always more to explore. I'm joined for this new first stint of the new year by Dave Barn. Dave, hello.
Hi James, how you doing?
Not too bad. I'd say, did you have a good Christmas? But that question is already, 2-3 weeks out of date. But that's just how it goes.
Well, we'll put this episode out quite quickly, but we are in mid-January, so probably slightly...
Yes. You know, like that question people put up online, is it too soon? Hashtag. We should have one, too late? Question mark. Yeah. It's probably too soon for Happy Valentine's, but...
For me, without going into all of the drama, but my recording schedule has been absolutely all over the place, because I was supposed to move house on the 22nd, and I found out 2 working days before I wasn't. So I thought I was moving somewhere that had no broadband for a period of time. It would have broadband, but might take a few weeks. So I was trying to front load recordings.
Right.
So I was recording like a nutcase before Christmas. And then all of a sudden, between about 2 days before Christmas and about 10 days ago, I didn't record a thing. So hopefully we're back to some kind of normality and we can start getting these in a bit more regularly as well, because we haven't recorded one for a little while.
No. But, I often find that a period away, and some of the frustration of that makes you keener to do it and gives you loads of ideas in the intervening time about, future episodes and things. And, even devising the schedule can be fun, and then changing it last minute if something comes up, a new movie or a new point of interest.
Or what actually happened here, James and I got talking, and I realise now James needs a taskmaster. This is his show, not mine, but he needs me to go, James, do this, right? So he went away and wrote out this schedule of quite a few potential episodes down the line and sent it to me. And I'm like annotating it, going, yeah, I agree with that, but I'd knock that film out and put this film in. And then we got to one, and I won't say what, James can if he wants, where I wrote, absolutely not. We look like complete wankers.
No, I'll go. Look, I'm going to go there. It's fine. I thought, let's do one about the gays.
What did you call this episode, James?
Gays on film.
Gays on film.
Yeah.
So I think I might be projecting here, but I think he may have written the gays or something.
Yeah. Let's talk about the gays. Let's talk about, homophobia.
But the and then he listed what was going to be in this episode.
But it's a point. No, it's a point.
For example, it was going to be something like, I don't know, Pride or something.
Philadelphia.
Like that. And Philadelphia, proper
milk.
Milk. Proper looks at the sort of issues of being of that orientation.
Rocky 3.
But then you threw in the birthday. What's the other one? You threw it, I read it and I'm like, milk, yeah, no problem. Philadelphia, yeah, no problem. Pride. We've got a 5-film bar, by the way, on episodes with a couple of exceptions. And then it was like, it might as well have been, are you being served?
Oh! There is look, the thing is, I suppose what I intended to think about, Dave, bearing in mind that the whole show is you're going into a genre, but you're also looking at how a genre changes or reflects according to the politics of the times. Now, one of the things that's come up this week, and I do think it's of interest, and I absolutely agree with it, this is the first time in my life where I've actually sided with the whole, what they call snowflakes, millennials, whatever. Friends has now come onto UK Netflix. It's been on US Netflix forever, but anyway, you're not, legally speaking, you're not supposed to have access to US Netflix. But anyway, the idea is that Friends is...
Under no circumstances.
Yeah, well, Friends 20 years ago was already, on the one hand, moving towards a more inclusive society, and it's more compassionate, which is terrific. But it's also still got that remnant of that 1990s awkward attitude. We talked about this a bit on the Richard Curtis podcast as well, the idea that there was sort of this phase in 90s to mid-noughties movies where the hero was distinguished by maybe having a gay friend, or his masculinity as a hero was intact.
We were moving towards more enlightened.
Yeah, but we weren't there.
The film was to point it out in the most awkward way possible.
Yeah.
Look, he's even friends with one of those gays.
Yeah, but there's, so I just, and there's still an element of that in society. So I suppose
I think
my
we should
idea,
talk to you about friends actually, because we've had a couple of exchanges on
yeah.
Facebook over it. I'm not totally in agreement with you, but carry on with your point.
No, I mean, my point was just in terms of the PolitFlix show, I suppose what I wanted to show Dave, and yes, I phrased it incredibly badly and it just looked like a homophobic 1970s sort of sitcom, awkward awfulness. But what I was trying to say was, look, if you look at Hollywood in each decade.
The only thing that could have made it worse is if you'd called the episode Shit Stabbers on Film.
Oh!
It was really clumsy.
We could just call it, oh!
I just went, absolutely not. And he came back and went, sorry, this is what I actually meant.
Yeah.
And the reworded version was like, right, okay.
I suppose what I'm trying to say in my awkward ways, number one, I wanted there to be a variety of genre anyway. I didn't want, because I kind of felt that the problem is if you just do, I don't know, films about homosexuality or lesbianism or whatever, that...
You can't do 5 films on of a milk kind of...
Precisely, because it's just, there's a lack of variety there. And so I thought the only way to look at it is to sort of think, well, show the progression, but also show the fact that there will be back steps whereby occasionally it still veers into that awkward comedy, which it still could do, to be fair. But I think maybe there's a case for just doing several podcasts where one is just, this is how civil rights campaigners, be they for sexuality or race or whatever, were treated. So you could do Milk with maybe, I don't know, Cry Freedom or something, so that it's not about the sexuality. Another one could be, actually look at the awkwardness of the comedy in something like an Are You Being Served or a Love Thy Neighbour versus the beginnings of progression. If you look at The Birdcage, okay, The Birdcage makes a lot of jokes about the awkwardness of being found out to be gay. But what I do like about it, with the exception of Hank Azaria being incredibly camp, is that really it's a send-up of the perceptions of masculinity, of machismo. The bit where Robin Williams is saying to Nathan Lane, this is what a macho man does. He doesn't just spread his butter, he smears the butter. And Nathan goes, I smear the butter. And then there's that bit where he goes, and you don't say, and he said, how would you greet somebody? He goes, oh, well, I'd say, hi, how are you? And Robin Williams saying, no, real macho men don't say, hi, how are you? They punch each other and go, how you doing, you old son of a bitch?
I'm going to stop you there, James,
yes.
On the pure basis that we are a handful of episodes away from doing this episode, so we'll return to it.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is, in my own inelegant way, I wasn't being homophobic.
The episode in your head wasn't actually what you described.
Precisely, and I'm not. I mean, I think the only time recently that I've been accused of homophobia, it was my fault. But yeah, I think I was watching the Intimidation.
You shot those couple of gay blokes, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was unfortunate, but there you go. It was paid photography gig, shot. See, it's double meaning. Turn it round.
I never thought you were homophobic. I just thought it was the worst description.
No, but I was seriously. I was out with a girl a couple of years ago, and I had met her after a run. And I'd been running with some gay men. And I thought, I was still in that sort of 1990s frame of mind where I thought, she's going to think I'm super duper sensitive because I've been running with some gays. I know, pathetic. Look, I've modified, I've matured, I've changed. So...
I just have the idea that there are a subset of men out there who think they can get funny by being nice gay men.
Well, that's how much I've changed in the past couple of years. I now realise that was very flawed, boarding school, adolescent, stupid, retarded behaviour. But yes, it was a bit awkward because I was talking to her in the cafe and stuff, and I'd been having the coffee with the gay guys who I've been running with because it was a sort of LGBT running thing. I didn't realise it was LGBT running thing until I was running with the guys, and they mentioned to me halfway through that it was LGBT. And that was fine, by the way, I was cool with it, and I had a coffee with them afterwards, but I was explaining to this girl that I'd been running with them and that they were LGBT. And then I just waited for the pause. I waited for her to go, James, you're so sensitive and brilliant.
I love you, let's get married.
Well, exactly. But she just sort of nodded at me. So I just said it again. I said, they were gay, by the way. And I nodded. She goes, James, so what? I said, and I had a coffee with them. And I ran with them.
I even used the same cutlery.
Yeah. So I was going to say, listen, James, not homophobic. And she goes, James, I'm just going to stop you there. She said, so... you went running with some gays. I said, yeah, great, isn't it? She goes, yeah, you went running with some gays, and you actually had coffee with them afterwards. I said, yeah, brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah,
she goes,
when you get your knickers off.
Yeah. She goes, James, if you think that it is somehow sublimely kind of super sensitive to go running with some gay men and then have an actual coffee with them afterwards, James, A, because what? What, because you're so enlightened, or because they would obviously fancy you and try and jump you or whatever it is, but you're okay with that, James. Then really, you've got the wrong girl if you think we're going to even have
Yeah,
a.
you should have told them you'd had a shower afterwards.
Well, precisely. Then she would have married me.
Then she would have married you because you'd have looked really progressive.
Yeah, it was never going to work. But, she did remind me of it. We went to see The Imitation Game, I think, shortly afterwards. And I didn't realise that the Cumberbatch character was gay. Like, he was with Keira Knightley in that film. And I thought, well, what?
Alan Turing.
Yeah, I know, but I didn't know the history of it, which I know sounds pathetic. I mean, I knew he was like this
Right.
code breaker guy. I just didn't know he was.
What's this show worth tonight?
I know. So I just, and she did remind me that I flinched apparently. Well, I flinched a little bit when I sat up and realised that Turing was a homosexual. She said I sort of jumped in my seat a little bit. That's not true, by the way. But she was a very entertaining correspondent, and before she blocked me on all social media and to get a restraining order or whatever it is, she was terrific fun and enlightened my approach to talking about sexuality.
Not entirely relevant to Friends.
Talk to me about Friends. Do you like it? Yes or no? Would you watch it?
Yeah.
Will you watch reruns of it?
Yes. Now I have been watching reruns of it in the last few days because it's easy TV, and I need easy. I need sometimes, because anyone who knows me tell you that overthinking is one of my flaws.
Yeah.
So I need slightly dumb stuff sometimes, but I need it to be somewhat smart in its dumbness. In that, like, it's essentially a really straightforward sitcom. There's no great themes or anything to think about in it.
Yep.
But it's very reasonably smartly written.
Cool.
My feelings about Friends have never really changed. It's the most aggressively corporate product I can think of at all. Down to from the coffee shop and the cup and the crockery that was sold, those outside size mugs that were sold everywhere in the years that followed, to the fact that I don't think the characters ever wear the same item of clothing twice. I think that they are effectively, models. They're living in an oversized apartment. They're selling kind of a dream lifestyle. I mean, even yesterday, I was watching the episode yesterday that had the Pretenders, Chrissy Hynde in it.
Yes.
And that episode led Phoebe to be outside effectively busking because Chrissy Hynde has taken her sort of space playing in the cafe. And there was just something I noticed that at the end of it, Phoebe's there counting the money she's made busking, only about $8 or something. But they are the cleanest, smoothest, crispest banknotes you'll ever see. That show was as corporate as it comes.
Yes.
But let's look at a few other things about it. In terms of the lack of diversity, I think we imagine that this is some massively changed world since the 90s. Now, the world does move on. Certainly, some LGBT issues have moved on a very long way since the 90s. But the lack of diversity in Friends was noticed and commented on at the time. It's not something we just watch 20 years later and go, look at that! And not only that, if you define the age of a millennial, which is someone, as I understand, reaching adulthood in or around the millennium, that means that they would have been in their very early 20s by the time Friends finished. This isn't something millennials are just finding now and are horrified about. This is something that, certainly the last handful of series, they'd have seen at the time anyway. I don't quite believe this outrage. I think that there is plenty of material in Friends that you can watch in a sort of retrospective manner and say, they wouldn't do that like that now. I mean, there's a classic line of humour that's in it that wouldn't be in it now, is the constant not wanting to be accused of being gay. But a lot of early episodes are Chandler worrying about looking and coming across as gay or camp or whatever. And Ross being really uncomfortable with the two lesbian, partners. Now, some of that would still be there because his wife has left him for another woman. That would still be there now. But the lack of diversity was known then. Some of the jokes have dated in a certain way. But by and large, it still plays the show it always was. And I think these amazingly woke attitudes you see now to it are nonsense, because we knew at the time, there would be opinion pieces at the time saying Friends is hideously white. They're living in this white world. There's no diversity in it. Their idea of diversity is that a couple of the women are fairly successful in it. So sexual politics, it was relatively progressive. Monica had a relatively high number of sexual partners. Phoebe, we know, had slept around quite a bit, and no judgments were ever made of those things. But what I see Friends as is a very safe corporate product, but it's well acted, it's incredibly well cast. There's been very few shows as well cast ever. Most of the characters are allowed to sort of change and grow through the show. I think the honourable exception to that would be Joey. Joey got dumber. I mean, Joey in season 10 was like a bit like Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson was always stupid, but like then he became comedy, really, really comedy stupid. And Joey did too. But it was always, I mean, it ran almost in the same. In fact, it ran a year. It finished at the same time, but started a year after Frasier. And I always thought Frasier was by far the smarter, superior comedy. And I still do. I think, like I say, Friends is effectively a marketing exercise in every way, but it still stands up as a really good one, and it's still really sharply written. For something that is unashamedly going out to the widest demographic it could, this show should be an awful lot dumber than it is. So I still like it. I still find it inherently extremely watchable. I find it very warm. I think that's something that American sitcoms do better than us.
Yeah.
But they don't necessarily. Well, hence British Office versus US Office.
Yeah, sure.
We can talk about that another time. But
that's what she said.
Yeah. No, that's the version. But I mean, they go too far with it. There are really schmaltzy endings to episodes. You know, all the hugging and shit. But it stands up. It does stand up, and I find this revaluing of the show only 14 years on. It only ended in 2004. Slightly disingenuous, because I think a millennial would watch it now with exactly the same eyes as they would have watched it 12 to 15 years ago. But the only difference is you can watch it now and say, okay, if they were making that now, they probably wouldn't put that bit in.
Yeah. No, I mean,
so I don't quite agree with you, but I can understand why people wouldn't like the show, because boy, is it corporate.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's funny. I mean, I think it's a laugh a second funny, and I think the people who hate the fact that it's written by committee really need a reality check. Because if something is a comedy, I want it to make me laugh, and that show does make me laugh. My reservations about Friends are little to do with the content, more the sort of, I suppose, double standard to some extent that it was the beginnings of. And that is now very, I believe, kind of prevalent in the sense that the line between nice and nasty. For example, if something is a corporate product, if it is peddling a corporate lifestyle, and one can argue that obviously any product on television or film, it has to have an element of that.
It's about burying the lead. Of course, you are there to sell and sell spin-offs, and if you can create products, I mean, I never really saw it, but had Frasier been even bigger than it was, maybe you could have gone and bought sort of Cafe Nervosa type products and things like that. I don't have a problem that it's corporate. I have a problem that it is so fucking obviously so, and I just think I think they could have toned it down and had like characters really wear the same clothes sometimes and things like that. And it's selling a slightly ludicrous degree of perfection, and the characters always look, unless the character in the show is physically sick with like a bug or something, which does happen. Characters get flu in the show and things like that. But outside of that, they're dressed like central casting at all times. And that's very much a precursor of like CW type shows we see now.
Yes, it is interesting. There is an aesthetic, because I was wondering, I've never watched Arrow of the Flash from like beginning to end. I've seen bits of it.
I've seen a few of them.
Yeah, and I've been impressed by it. But
if you want someone to be an intellectual in like Arrow, and they're female, you cast a supermodel and stick a pair of glasses on her.
Yeah, I've got no objections to the intellectual being still kind of, I suppose, physically vital, because I actually think it's really good and progressive to move away from.
I do too, but obviously we don't live in a world where everyone's fucking gorgeous.
No, and we don't live in a world where everyone's really clever either.
No.
It's just so.
And that was sort Friends. I mean,
Yeah.
if you cast it now, it would have a closer mix to something like The Big Bang Theory. There would be an Asian amongst the cast, or one of the women would have been black, or something like that.
Oh, totally, yeah.
They may even have one of them, Chandler might have turned out to be gay.
I would hope so. I would hope so, because I think, one of my objections with it as a show is the fact that he was so, both within the narrative of the show and externally for people who enjoyed it, he was such a popular character, to the extent that I would be in a student common room at the time. In the same, you were talking about this very interestingly on the Tarantino podcast, and do expect us to talk. But there came a point between, it was sort of both with Tarantino and with Friends, and bizarrely, you couldn't get two more diametrically opposed universes. But at the same time, mid to late 90s into the noughties, people starting to mimic not so much precise beats of the conversations, but the tone and the rhythm of the scripts in those. Now, maybe it's just me being very sensitive and noting those differences. Because
I'm really sensitive. I'm sensitive to rhythms of speech.
Yeah, but I noticed people were mimicking it.
Friends, for a period of time, changed the flow of language in certain demographics.
Finally, so it's not just me who noticed that.
No.
Could you be any more?
Having said that, if there's one human being on this planet who would spot it, it would be me. So it may not be just you, but it may be just us.
Yeah. I mean, but it was like, I literally would overhear certain conversations where the people weren't trying to affect it, and they weren't, copying.
No, they weren't. It just seeps in. I mean, bear in mind, it was like 2 episodes a day on, pre-streaming. There was a very steady diet of the show.
Yeah. So I guess I was just at the time, maybe, I don't know, I wouldn't call myself an angry young man or an angry older man or whatever. But I suppose, I did see an element of the very concept of friendship or being a friend or whatever it was, which to my mind is something that one should simply not take for granted. But, there's something very wrong if you don't have something resembling some sort of circle of at the very least acquaintances on whom you can call occasionally and, keep up with, go to the pictures, go to the snooker, whatever.
Yeah, I'm a typical man. I make nowhere near enough effort with my friends, but if I had difficulties in life, there are a number of people I could call on without reservation.
Yeah, I suppose I was flummoxed, Dave, by the idea that this wasn't just a sitcom. This was becoming a lifestyle thing. People were mimicking it, and people were starting to use the concept of friendship as a kind of I can't explain it, but I just got the feeling, and once again, this was probably me being an oversensitive.
We'll figure out the word.
Okay.
The concept of what? Try talk me around it.
I felt the concept of friendship was being weaponized as a kind of a corporate lifestyle sort of asset that people were showing off. It was pre-social media, but it was the beginnings of it.
They were selling those kinds of friendships as an aspiration.
Yeah, and if you didn't have those, precisely, and there were people who were starting to have those, and so I felt jealous as such. Well, yeah, damn it, I felt jealous.
I saw the episode yesterday, because I just got a run of them. Basically, I went out and did a couple of things yesterday morning, came back, sprawled out on the sofa, thinking about my next move.
Yes.
I was a bit cold, so I put a blanket over myself, which was I would have gone to put the heating on, but it was too far away and I was lazy. But the cat took that as an immediate jump on me kind of moment, and the cat fell asleep. So I just thought, fuck it, I'll put Friends on, and I watched episode after episode yesterday.
Yeah.
And I saw the episode where Marcel, Ross's monkey, so you can tell him on the early ones, goes missing in the building, and like the lady from like animal control or pest control or whatever it is comes out to try and catch this thing, and it turns out to be someone who Monica and Rachel have been to school with, and a lot of the jokes were at her expense of how lonely she'd been in school.
Yeah.
So there are in individual beats and content, you can pick on things that you go, that's actually really thoughtless.
Yeah, and quite nasty.
But in 10 years we'll be doing it on this stuff from now. It's just,
yeah.
It's the way life is. It's hardly love thy neighbour.
No. But then love thy neighbour, someone mentioned that, it may have been you, but my point was, love thy neighbour, even though that is obnoxious and objectionable. The joke even there was, you're not supposed to be like that. That it was funny. That what people don't get about things like love thy neighbour.
To death us do part. You were supposed to laugh at this twat.
Yeah, and that was what I remember Warren Mitchell said. Warren Mitchell said that somebody once...
Counter-racist who would go, good job saying all that about the darkies.
Yeah, and he said that's not what it's about.
No, it's there to ridicule assholes like you.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah,
Which
so...
is great, isn't it?
But
if Warren Mitchell did indeed confront people with that sort of thing, then
Well, he was a Jewish man himself, you know. But I think that the thing is, it can be weaponized as well in a different way, in the sense that there's this whole new era of comedy about being awkward and about trying to be politically correct. Now, for me, I think that's a thinly veiled excuse to go places that you know you shouldn't go anymore. So I think a lot of the UK office, not the US equivalent, although the US does it, but it does it with just that little bit more warmth behind it, so you give it a pass, is just this tendency to go to places like, ooh, we were talking earlier on about perceived homophobia or whatever. There's a lot of that in comedy nowadays where we'll joke about the perception of being seen to be something, and the difficulties of that. But really what we're doing is saying, I hate this political correctness shit and I really wish I could be nasty to people. I kind of think there's still a little bit of that around. I think that's what we've got to fight. And I see that a little bit in Friends, and I saw it on day one, which I didn't like it as much. But
if I'm honest, why politically correct is an insult.
Yeah.
It actually just means trying to be decent to each other.
Trying to be nice, yeah. A good person. It's political correctness gone mad. You know, but there you have it. But we could go on forever with this. Speaking of political correctness and changing attitudes, did you see The Last Jedi? And of course you did.
I've seen The Last Jedi a few times now. But I don't think I intended to see it 3 times theatrically, but I did. The reason being, I saw it first week, as you would.
Right.
I was expecting 2 viewings, right? Because I've got a friend that I go and see most sort of genre films with.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, just as an aside, we're going to come to the Thomas Crown affair in a minute.
Yes.
And I'm looking up Google image searches ready to create this into the YouTube file that we put live.
Yes.
And fuck me, is Steve McQueen cool as fuck.
Yeah, he is,
anyway, Pierce Brosnan just doesn't have it the same way.
Yes.
Anyway,
yes.
although I haven't said that, you better cast it, but we'll get to that.
Yes.
In terms of The Last Jedi, I saw it on its opening Friday. I'm not a great one for midnight screenings in particular. Partly because of work the next day, partly because I'm normally surrounded by drunks, and partly because the few times I've done it, my average perception of the film has been lower than my long-term perception of the film, and I think that's probably because I'm too tired.
Right.
So I prefer to see it sort of 5 p.m. opening day, if you like, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't get to it till actually it was a Saturday, or a Friday, forget which. I think it was a Saturday. With my friend who I always go with, he brought his daughter and their friends and all the rest of it, went to see it. But there's somebody I worked with, like in a temp job about 3 years ago, who's a Star Wars nut. So I go with him once a year to see Star Wars. So that's my 2 viewings, if you like. But in the middle of those 2 viewings, I was due to do an Expect Us to Talk on it, which I never ended up doing. Long story, won't go into it here. So I went to see it again because I wasn't sure enough about what I thought of this film. So I've seen it 3 times. My gut feeling when I saw it the first time is proving to be correct for me, in that I felt it would be a grower. I felt it would be a film that would reward repeat viewings, and it does. It isn't the easy pleasures of The Force Awakens. This is a difficult, challenging film that breaks down what you think a Star Wars, much like Casino Royale, it redefines what a film of that genre can be. A saga film, because obviously we've already had Rogue One. Now, to not like it is not a problem. All I would say to anyone who doesn't like it is, you may never like it, but give it the benefit of repeat viewings, because I think you've got a better shot of liking it after more viewings. Anyway, the second thing I would say is, get that template out of your head, because The Last Jedi is purely, if it's about anything, it's about breaking down expectations. It really is totally not giving us what we would have expected.
No.
And it was frustrating to me to have gone into The Force Awakens and hear nothing but corporate bloody Disney producing a homogenized product we've seen before. They come out with this product, which has completely subverted expectations, and people are furious that Disney are ruining it that way as well. What we are not getting with these films is cookie cutter products. We're getting films that are challenging and not what we would expect. To not like that is perfectly valid. The reaction to The Last Jedi, frankly, has been utterly fucking laughable, however.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this. I wasn't entertained by the film. I didn't enjoy the film. As in, I was persistently looking at my watch. As in, I took a break to go and do my wee-wees about halfway through it, because it is that long. I accidentally took the fire escape which meant that I was actually outside the cinema around the back of it. Yeah. Well, no, I managed to make it to the actual lavatory just for sanitary purposes. But I then, the adventure that I had in trying to run back through the snow instantly, through the ice, into the cinema via its aforementioned lavatory, and accidentally going to several other screenings of Star Wars at various different points. Finally getting back to the one that I was in was to me at the time more exciting, as was afterwards, because I didn't dress up as Han Solo because I don't have a Han Solo outfit. I do have a Han Solo, I can't believe I'm even admitting this, I have a Han Solo coat, a jacket with all the pockets in it. Now you can get away with wearing it without looking like you're in cosplay. But it was an emergency. I have a friend who had dressed up as Princess Leia, and she put it in her newsfeed. I thought, right, there's no way I'm letting you do that without me trying to best you the next day by dressing up as Han Solo. So those, for me, were more entertaining than the film. In retrospect, I then thought, grow up, James, be nice about this. So the review that I wrote, it wasn't me being scared of the Star Wars trolls.
I have a confession to make. I've not read that review, James. I don't
Okay.
know what you said.
No, that's fine. Okay, well, this is basically what I said, and I know that there were probably already trolls online. I've stopped looking at the Movie Viral Twitter feed in the end because it just got so nasty. But the position I took was, look, this is a very well made, very exceptionally well crafted film that has a monumental amount of care, attention, inspiration, innovation in its storytelling, in its respect for the lore, but in its manipulation of it very slightly, in the visuals, in the risks it takes, in the performances, the score, everything's perfect about it. I said, if anyone is going to go out there and say it's shit or it's rubbish, you really need a reality check, because you cannot say that. Quality-wise, it's among the best of the series. Having said that, I felt, and I think I still feel, because I did see it a second time, was this. Yes, there are elements of Star Wars that are, in inverted commas, dark. Revenge of the Sith is a far darker film than The Last Jedi in terms of just what happens, in terms of the stakes and so on, right?
I'm not sure I agree.
Okay,
I would buy that as a valid argument.
Okay, Revenge of the Sith has child murder, right? Do you know what I mean?
I think it's more the fact that, I'll probably give you that, to be fair. What I would just say, though, is the situation they find themselves in at the end of The Last Jedi is certainly
pretty bleak.
It's more desperate than it was at the end of Empire Strikes Back, for example.
Yes.
Because at the end of the Empire Strikes Back, they've still got something of a fleet there.
Yep.
A fleet of their ships.
Yep.
Right at the very end of the film. And also they've got a rendezvous with people elsewhere, so there are little pockets of them elsewhere as well. So they have a functioning rebellion at the end of that film. At the end of The Last Jedi, the last number check we get is 400, and that's before what's the character called? Holdo goes smashing into the ship list. What I'm saying is they're still picking ships off after we get that number check of 400. There are a few dozen of them left at best in that galaxy at the end of The Last Jedi. That's as desperate as we've ever known in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah. No, I mean, I appreciate that, but I think my point is this: with Revenge of the Sith, for example, which is my least favourite of the entire series, still.
It's not an uncommon view. It's not my least favourite, but I think all the prequels are shit, to be fair.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm actually quite nice on Clones, bizarrely, and on Phantom Menace, but I
think Phantom Menace is harshly treated, so
yes.
I tend to be a little bit of a defender of it, but never mistake that for I think it's good.
No. But what I'm saying is that the reason I actually hated and still hate Sith is that it goes to places it doesn't need to go. Partly because George had just, I suppose, run out of filler things to do in between scenes when he didn't need to. Empire Strikes Back, which is my favourite and is many people's favourite, some people justify it being their favourite because they say it is, in inverted commas, the darkest one. I don't agree with that. I don't. Yeah.
Nothing to do with it being the best.
No, I think it's the best because it has heart.
You could frame that darker argument somewhat different and have a point.
Yeah.
I think if instead of darkest, you say that dark approach makes it the bravest, you've got a point.
Yeah. I think for me, the reason The Empire Strikes Back works best for me is that it has a warmth to it. There's a sense of genuine, organic human romance to it. There's a timeless quality to it. It could be Spencer Tracy with Katharine Hepburn when you're doing Han Solo.
It's got a lot of that screwball comedy in this one. That's the thing. It's actually the funniest of the original trilogy.
Yeah.
So you can talk dark all you like. It's the funniest of the original trilogy by a distance.
You're seeing the beginnings of Indiana Jones as well there. And Spielberg himself said it.
That, and they've been shooting that not very long afterwards.
Yeah.
But I think, certainly The Last Jedi, what it's done is redefine the language of a Star Wars film for me. The visual language, but also the cultural language that Star Wars originally called on those sort of 1930s serials and all the rest of it. Flash Gordon, although it's not as close to Flash Gordon as you might think. And so on. And there was a structure that we would see repeated through films. Now, yes, you can see a bit of The Empire Strikes Back here and all the rest of it. But I was watching this film, and the thing I was put in mind of most of all was the 2000s remake of Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in it.
There's a hell of a lot of that in it. I mean, there's one of the very first, in fact, it might even be the first episode. I never think of it as the first because there's a mini-series before this. So I always think of it as like the third episode or something. But the first official episode or the second, I can't remember, of the first series was called the 33s.
Mm.
And they had to, they had dwindling supplies and dwindling numbers. And they had to make like a jump, like very analogous to The Last Jedi, every 33 minutes to stay ahead of the Cylons.
Yes.
And it was exhausting them and exhausting their supplies. That is The Last Jedi in a nutshell as a film.
Mm.
But it's also that they've got to elect a president while they're this tiny ragtag fleet.
Right.
And of course with Leia out of commission, who's now in charge? How do you keep order and structure? I mean, Poe is demoted. Well, what does a demotion mean when you're only a few hundred people anyway? All of those sorts of things I found challenging and interesting. The one bit of the film I really didn't like was the adventures of fucking Finn and Rose. Now, I love the Rose character, by the way. I saw memes calling her the worst Star Wars character ever, and I just think that there's got to be a hint.
Yeah, but we know where that comes from. We know where that comes from, and it's not. It's nothing to do with Star Wars.
That comes from a mixture of race, gender, and also the fact that she's not a knockout beauty.
Yeah.
I think. Now, there'll be people listening to this probably who say, well, I think that, and I don't feel that way at all. Fine, there are exceptions to every rule.
Yeah.
But I just think, what have you been watching if you think that's remotely a poor character, let alone a poor Star Wars character?
Yeah.
But they go to this planet, which is almost like a fucking pleasure planet, really.
Canto Bight.
A very sort of
casino.
Sci-fi inspired, yet 1930s style casino.
Yeah.
I mean, the code breaker they were looking for actually looks like he could be in like The Artist or something like that.
Yeah, he was really cool. I wish they'd used him more, actually.
But that sequence of the film was way too long for what they're trying to achieve. So it isn't a perfect film, but for those who are just saying, oh, Disney have ruined it, Disney probably don't have as much to do with it as you think, other than we demand a certain amount of product. I think Lucasfilm, I think this is a Kathleen Kennedy exercise as much as anything else. I think what Ryan Johnson has done is brave and challenging, and if you try something, you'll fuck it up sometimes. It's the same with Bond films. You want to do something different occasionally, otherwise you get Tomorrow Never Dies every 2 fucking years. remember that when we got a Bond film every 2 years? I just think that, and then people are pointing at the box office, and I think, well, show me the Star Wars trilogy so far where the second film hasn't been considerably the lowest grossing, because they always are. That's standard. This is a tough, challenging, long film, and it didn't have the pent-up demand that The Force Awakens had behind it.
Yeah.
So it was never going to do that sort of money. I do have some issues with it. I'm not wildly in love with all the Luke and Rey stuff, actually, which I know a lot of people like.
Well, I thought that the sexual relationship between them was gratuitous and forced.
I thought a pole necklace was unnecessary at this stage, particularly from a mentor figure.
Look at what my force powers can do. You have no idea, right? No, that's I can't believe I just went there.
Could
but
you force my thighs back together, please?
But in a weird way, they did have. When I say chemistry, I don't mean sexual chemistry. I mean,
no, there was a tension there.
Yeah.
Chemistry.
In the sense that he could definitely see himself in her, and like she's so nice.
You know what?
You know.
When The Godfather 2 first screened,
Yeah.
When I say first screened, I don't mean it's public screening. I mean it's assembly cut.
Yeah.
He screened it for people whose opinion he trusted and so on. The Dean Cundys and people like that who were working on the film. And they said that it was just you couldn't anchor yourself in anything before they moved on. You had a little bit of Bobby De Niro from like 1919 or whatever, but then all of a sudden it's like back to the 50s and Nevada and all the rest of it. What he ended up doing was doubling the length of each section. So instead of cutting 8 times between the two, he cut 4 times between the two, something like that. The Last Jedi does feel like a slightly released at a slightly imperfect point in that phase of trying to work out how the film should be pieced together as a mosaic. I do feel like we keep cutting back to this island with Luke and Rey, and I sometimes feel like stay there a bit longer, get what you want out, and then move on.
Yeah.
So it isn't perfect. I've got problems with this film, but I just think it's got balls the size of church bells to release a Star Wars film like this. And I actually am so surprised that Disney are taking even more heat after this film.
Yeah.
Because I actually think this is the perfect retort to anyone that thinks Disney is going to homogenize this product.
No, quite the opposite. And I'm sick of all the people talking about social justice warriors and so on. You know, it is ultimately a moral fairy tale, and it will therefore reflect into or be reflective of the morality of the day. And we are a more enlightened society now, and we talk about human rights, we talk about animal rights. You know, why shouldn't Star Wars?
The only people who say social justice warriors in this world and continually point about it are regressive fucking pigs.
Yes.
And they can suck my dick.
Well, yeah, let's not go too far. You know, I mean, you know, we yeah. I mean, but yes, you've lowered the tone, Dave, yet again. You were doing so well. We might even get messages in offering to do that. You know, so you always have to be careful. You might have just incited.
I will.
But in the final analysis, what I'm saying, if I'm saying anything at all, I love saying that. It's just, in fact, I got called out on that in my teaching all the time. They would know when I was using a Stark quote, like just even particular lines. But what I would say is that I didn't find it an entertaining or fun or energizing film, and I felt there was a bit of a charisma vacuum in it, but the intention, the craftsmanship...
We do disagree there, because I thought Poe was fucking charismatic as fuck.
You really do. You really think he's not just a cut-priced wannabe Han Solo.
And Finn as well, the bits where he was like, trying to, when he's sort of with Rose and going, may the Force be with you, and he's like, I don't know if he's had something done to his teeth, because they looked really veneery in this film as well.
Who, Finn or Poe?
Finn. No, I don't think there's any sort of charisma here, but then you are more attached to the Han Solo character than I am.
In a non-gay way. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
You want a Han Solo analog. We've sort of got one, we haven't really got one at the same time.
Yes.
I was just happy with what we got.
And my problem with that is that I just always thought that Finn was going to be that. And I think they could have taken...
But the problem is you can't match the old characters to the new ones exactly.
No, that's true.
Good.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they've taken a few chances with it, and that's all I wanted. Yeah. I'm happier that they've taken some chances than I am worried about how good the actual end result is.
Yeah, no, totally.
The fact that I actually quite like the end result is a good thing.
Yes. So, I mean, we could probably do a separate cast on it. We could do Star Wars Politics Part 2. We get Frank back and do some more on that, because there's fascinating stuff. But let's move on.
Let's wait for episode 9, because then we'd have
an overview. Yes. Right. Thomas Crown. The first one, Steve McQueen.
Steve McQueen, 1968. Really, this is a Norma Jewison film. Now, if you look up Norma Jewison's filmography, there's loads of great stuff in it. I think the last thing I can think of that he did that had a high profile might have been The Hurricane. It was a real life boxer who went away for a murder he didn't commit. It was played on film by Denzel Washington, and I'm blanking on the name of the actual boxer. He was a middleweight. Anyway,
we can stick it in show notes if you want.
Would you say Norma Jewison's probably best known for In the Heat of the Night?
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, I'd actually say it's this.
Would you say so? I'm going to look up his filmography now.
He was consistently good. I don't think he was prolific, was he?
Just as a director, 44 credits. He did do The Hurricane in 1999. He did Moonstruck. He'd be known for that, certainly, because that was an Oscar-winning film, or certainly at an actor's level it was. He did the 1975 Rollerball, which action-wise is great, but all the bits around the action are quite dull, though. In the Heat of the Night, The Cincinnati Kid, and then there's a load of like TV and other things. He's not that prolific after Yeah, there's two and three gaps here and there. Yeah, he's probably best known for this and in the heat of the night, I would say. Um, I think it's easy to watch this film and not a lot of other um, Steve McQueen and not realise that he's a slight miscast here. This is playing very much against type. Steve McQueen was a lot more blue collar than he is in this film, isn't he? Generally.
Yes,
Bullet,
and
The
yet
Tower in Inferno.
it's so difficult because with
He certainly wasn't the dapper gentleman, was he? Usually.
the Americans, by their nature, I mean, I can't even say Americans, as you know, because it's not a generalization. You're talking about, states within states and different attitudes. But having said that, although it's fair to say that they have versions of snobbery and they have versions of class systems, I think it's also fair to say that as an American, you can vary your style a bit more. So you could be perfectly pinstriped one day, and then the next day you can go and be a cowboy. Yeah. No, yeah, he's more of a blue collar. He's a blue collar hero, but he is convincing in the white collar world.
Let's go through some positives and negatives then.
Yeah.
I am not sure there's ever been a cooler screen presence than Steve McQueen. The best example I can think of is Bullet, because I was talking about Bruce Willis on the Pulp Fiction on the Pulp Fiction show I did for Jukes Talk last week, and I was saying how fucking lazy he's become as an actor. Actually, it suits some people and it doesn't suit others. Steve McQueen might be the best I've ever seen it doing not very much. If you watch him in Bullet, there's a lot of stillness about him. He doesn't move a hell of a lot. It's a lot of staring. His dialogue is minimal, but he just burns the screen up. He's just got it. There are very few actors who have it in the same way. Both in looks and style, Daniel Craig's probably the closest we've got in that actually he's a little bit more blue collar than Bond would suggest as well. And also, the Bond films have definitely tried to take out quite a lot of dialogue since he's been in the role. I love him in this. I don't love the use of the character necessarily, because what the 99 version gets right that this one gets wrong is it has him two hands off. The both films postulate right. The Thomas Crown Affair in both versions is a rich, bored playboy committing a crime, really because of said boredom, and an insurance investigator, or I don't know, maybe Faye Dunaway was an FBI agent, I'm not sure, I think they were both insurance investigators, sent along to investigate, but then ending up getting involved with him, and then him wanting to sort of see if they are really on his side. Now, firstly, I thought remakes are quite often lacking in any originality whatsoever because they're remakes. But what I loved about the 99 version of the film, and we'll go into more detail later, is it did observe this film and correct some of its flaws. If you're bored and think I'm going to commit some really audacious crime because I'm bored, I'm not sure you'd be as hands off as Steve McQueen is in this. He arranges it all and then just stands in his office waiting for it to be done, and then at a certain time he drives to the cemetery and picks up a couple of bags of money from one of the wastebaskets. Pierce Brosnan is at the forefront of actually doing the crime in his. The second thing is it's a bank robbery, which is a bit uninspired. Again, in the 99 version, they give him something that actually interests him to do, and we'll get into the details of it when we get to that film, but they give him a crime that not only addresses his boredom, but will attain him something that we know he wants. So that's more interesting to me. The visual style is dated terribly because it has a lot of sort of multi-images within frames. Made me think of Time Code, the film, that sort of experimental film with Saffron Burrows from the 90s.
Yeah.
I haven't seen everything, I promise, but I've seen Time Code somehow. Now, I've got mixed feelings on the different chemistries in the two films. I don't actually think, for all the iconic pictures of the two of them, with the exception of one scene, I actually think Pierce Brosnan and Rene Russo have more chemistry, which really gets me annoyed about his run as James Bond, but again, we'll come back to that. But I have to say, the chess match is fucking filth, and I love it.
Yeah. No, it's filthy, but it's also still subtle. And
I'm
there's
joking when I say it's fucking filthy.
no, but it is. No, but Dave, it is. You know,
But
she
but it
she
is like
she sucks off a knight. I think a chess piece. Well, she doesn't quite give it a blowy, but it comes. There's there's some mouth.
Definitely struggling to concentrate. The sexual tension in the room is incredible.
Yes, and it's well choreographed and edited.
It is one of those where you like throw the table off over and get at it.
Yes,
it's incredible. Most people listening to this probably be more familiar with the piss tape from the Austin Powers film. Genuinely, I cannot believe how much sexual tension they've managed to create from a game of chess. And the guy just can't concentrate. At one point, he sort of castles, and it's like you can tell him struggling to concentrate.
Yeah.
And they can't keep their eyes off each other. And she's kind of touching her lapel and stuff like that, and her hair a bit. And it's subtler than it sounds, but it is. There's in no doubt where that relationship's going. There isn't quite the same equivalent in the Brosnan film. I know the sequence that's meant to be the analogue of it, but there isn't quite the same. Having said that, I think I buy Steve McQueen as a playboy more than I do Pierce Brosnan, because both versions of them like to go gliding and things like that. Well, maybe it's because Steve McQueen was a racing driver as well, but that strikes me as right up Steve McQueen's alley. I'm not sure that Pierce Brosnan would in the same way.
It's one of the problems with dear old Pierce is that although he's clearly in real life and on screen in a number of parts that he's played, obviously perfectly competent. And I'm not accusing him of being in any way deceptive about his own capacities, but that's, the nature of the actor. And I sometimes something about Pierce was that he almost protested too much about how much he loved stuff like that. I remember when The World Is Not Enough, there was a documentary about it or something. He goes, yes, and I love going out on boats, and I love the action of being on the boat and stuff. And he's not quite trying to claim, because obviously there are scenes where it's Pierce in that boat in The World Is Not Enough. He was very physical. He was involved in the stunts.
Yeah, but it's amazing how insiders on set are always like, yeah, we couldn't keep him away from it, and then he was going at 70, and we were all worried, and it's like,
really
amazing. However, every action leading man gets those anecdotes told about them.
Yes,
they are true in very few cases. They're true when it's Tom Cruise, because Tom Cruise is a producer, and he's also as rich as they come, so he can effectively provide his own indemnity.
Yeah.
But insurance companies do not let actors put their life at risk. Not in that way. I mean, I know accidents do happen on sets, and actors have died on sets, but by and large, health and safety comes first.
Yeah.
They do enough that they can bang shoulders, knees, ankles. You do get actors who are quite damaged after a few years in a role. Daniel Craig's had quite a lot of damage from playing Bond, but he didn't crash through the windows of the Grand Bazaar. He did.
No. But I mean, Pierce had a couple of injuries on Bond. He had on Tomorrow Never Dies, I think.
He did his knee on Tomorrow Never Dies. It's the bit where he jumps on the hovercraft.
That Die Another Day, rather, he did his knee in, the meniscus. Yeah. But on Tomorrow Never Dies as well, there was a scar. Someone, I think, there was a stump.
Tomorrow Never Dies. If you look at Pierce Brosnan closely, there's a scar on his lip, and it comes from Tomorrow Never Dies.
Yeah. So to say that he didn't do any of that would be to do a disservice to Pierce. But what I am trying to say is that
we're almost. I know it's still scars, but we're talking about doing yourself a mischief, not getting fucking decapitated.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, there is something about Pierce that one thinks of a certain, I suppose, work ethic and refinement and care. There's something very composed about Pierce, to the extent that I do not buy the idea of him, whether in character.
I don't buy, fuck it, let's have a go.
Yes, that's not him.
Steve McQueen, he used to risk his life in an era where racing cars were very dangerous things.
Yeah, because that was what he did. It was fun, and that's.
It was a bit of a daredevil.
You see, the thing is, and this is where I mean, you used the phrase Walter Mitty or whatever the other day, and one has to be very careful with the phrase Walter Mitty because it's become polluted as a term. Because Walter Mitty in the good old days meant a guy who just daydreams, if you like, right? As in the actual movie with Danny Kaye.
Whereas now it's painting people as complete fantasists.
Fantasists who are destructive, who go and tell people that they
recognise it for what it was.
Yeah, no, sure. What I'm saying is, the Walter Mitty factor is in telling the Walter Mitty of today, where people are associated with deceiving people, telling them, "Oh, I'm in the SAS, but I'm having a pint here." That's not the kind of Walter Mitty that I think of. I mean, I do understand that implication, But when I think Walter Mitty, I think all men to some extent have a Walter Mitty side, as in we daydream when we're looking out a window about racing a car.
We daydream a much more colourful life than
Yeah, we'd love to race a car. We'd love to whatever.
Okay.
Steve McQueen did the things that even the most distinguished man, who to someone else might even still be the next Walter Mitty's fantasy, you know.
And there is a bit, yeah, I know, and there's a bit of the live fast die young about him as well, because he died at 50.
How did he die? Tell me about the cancer.
Cancer. He was, I forget, I think it might have been during his army service, I forget now, but he worked with asbestos.
Okay, it's very, very sad.
So he got sick around late 78, something like that.
Right.
Steve McQueen was born in 1930, I think.
Right.
Something like that. So I can't remember what time of year. So I don't know if I think he had his 50th birthday by the time he died. By the time he died, it was all experimental treatments and all the rest of it. He was having some weird procedures done that were costing him a fortune. There are certainly thoughts that he was being ripped off and exploited for his illness, but whatever the case, he was at his peak probably in terms of leading man status from his mid-30s to his mid-40s.
Yeah.
And again, so he was a little bit older than the average leading man in some respects. He's not a pretty boy at all, but he's an extraordinarily alpha, handsome male. Again, very much, I know they look alike, so I'm probably reaching for a lazy comparator, but again, a very Daniel Craig. Daniel Craig is not a conventionally handsome man. Not really.
No, but he's
really fucking striking. Yeah. And he's really, really alpha as well. I totally get why women would want him.
His voice as well.
And his voice as well. But in a way that, like, the knock on Timothy Dalton was always that he wasn't attractive enough to women. Well, maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But I can at least see it with Daniel Craig. But he's not a pretty boy like Pierce Brosnan. And neither is Steve McQueen. Neither was Steve McQueen.
I think that Steve McQueen probably has a slight. I mean, to be fair as well to Steve McQueen, because I think the Daniel Craig comparison is something that I think even Daniel Craig sort of shrugs his shoulders at. And one never knows whether
there was talk of biopics about 10 years ago. That was all.
Yeah.
When Daniel Craig was around the 40 mark.
Yeah.
Which would have the equivalent time in Steve McQueen's life would have put that at around 70. There was talk of I don't know how far those talks got, but when I watched Quantum of Solace, they are playing on those similarities because I've just found the image that's going to be used on this show when I create a video of it. Steve McQueen's wearing shades in it. He's wearing sunglasses. They put Bond-in sunglasses in Quantum of Solace, but they also put him in cardigans, which is a very sort of retro 60s and early 70s chic. And they had a lot of very still shots of him whenever the camera did stay still in that film. And I remember leaning into my father during Quantum of Solace and saying they are really trying to play up the Steve McQueen and the Steve McQueen-ish appeal of this actor. Yeah. So they lent into it for a good period of time. Daniel Craig's getting too old now. Daniel Craig this year will turn the age Steve McQueen died at. Yeah. So we're now not in a position where this will ever happen, but it could have happened 10 years ago. Yeah,
but I think the long and the short of it as well is that Daniel Craig probably would be quite amused by the comparison because even though Daniel Craig plays very cool, one gets a bit. There's something about Steve McQueen that is a character in and of himself that transcends whatever genre he's in. He is a character and he is a star as much as an actor. Daniel Craig is probably a far better actor than Steve McQueen
I think that's fair to say.
Could dream of. But I think, you know, without meaning to cast aspersions on Daniel Craig or to take the piss or anything, or Daniel Craig, if you're watching, I think you'll actually get what I'm saying here, and I'm saying it in a nice way. You're not as cool as Steve McQueen. Not in real life, in the sense that I don't think Daniel Craig would want to be that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think...
He's a normal bloke.
Steve McQueen never had to walk onto set and turn anything on. It was already there.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
Certainly. But this is kind of an against type film, is all I'm saying. You go and watch a lot of what he did, and the suits he's wearing in this, although dated, are still effortlessly cool. You used as your photo on Facebook for a while that sort of terrace breakfast scene.
Yes. Oh.
It's a wonderful shot.
It's so sexy. So in fact, I might use that again. It's my way of sort of saying, girls, this is actually the kind of lifestyle yes, this is the lifestyle that I'm actually living. I do actually have a photo of myself in that sort of post from years ago. I may put that one up, but you know. But the idea is that
the film in general, I mean, its limitations as a film are that
is it pure style? Is that what you're saying, basically?
No, because that makes it a nice curio. I kind of like that. But
Hmm.
the score's great. It's Michel Legrand,
Yeah.
who went on to do Never Say Never Again, which is
It's
but he also won an Oscar for Windmills of Your Mind.
such a great song.
For this film. So it's got this just wonderful feeling of it. You can tell it's the same era as The Graduate.
Yes.
It's got that kind of similar quality, although The Graduate score. Oh, we must crowbar The Graduate into one of these shows at some point because I fucking love it.
Before Dustin Hoffman either dies or is arrested.
Or is arrested. Well, it's just the Graduate always makes me think of Canada, which is weird because there's no Canada in the film.
Yes, that is a bit weird.
I bought it on a Blu-ray, it was like a little storybook version of a Blu-ray digipack sort of thing, with a foreword from, was it Steven Soderbergh or James Gunn or something, like another director anyway. And I watched it and loved the music so much I bought the score. And like within a couple of days, I flew to Canada for like a holiday.
Mm.
So I was driving around in North America with that score playing. So it just reminds me of that. But I absolutely adore it. But Windmills of Your Mind does come from an era where you've got stuff like Sound of Silence going into films.
Yes.
I love all that. The problem is he's too hands off with his crime.
Mm-hmm.
Bizarrely, there is extraordinary chemistry between them in the scene, in the chess scene, but not anywhere else, because he's too closed off from the world as a presence. Steve McQueen's not actually designed to have great chemistry with anyone. He's too stoic. He's too closed off. I think the crime that he commits is kind of a bit prosaic, but that's only informed by the 99 version. So it's a good film. I don't think it's a great film. I think it's elevated by having one of two of the all-time Hollywood greats in it.
Yeah.
Because with Steve McQueen and Faye Dunaway.
Mm-hmm. So let's move on to Pierce. Good old Pierce. Yes, Thomas Crown. Now I remember when he first started talking about this, and I remember even laughing. But I don't want to be nasty about this because I love Pierce. But when I think it was 15, 16, and when he had just been.
Pierce in the same way you might love a small child you pat the head off.
Yes, that's really patronising and terrible.
It's kind of a patronising love.
Yes, he reminds me of my dad or something. I don't know. There's just that he's lovely and he works hard and he but yeah, you know what I mean. But the thing is, he was.
I have to say, this is one of the best things I've ever seen in him.
Yeah, because the thing is, he was so enthused about it, and I remember he was pitching it as soon as because he knew this is where Pierce Brosnan.
This is an Irish Dreamtime production.
Yes, and this is why I will never, for all of my just taking the piss out of him, I'm never going to underestimate Pierce because his commercial vision was such. He knew that having had time in the wilderness, post almost being Bond, he didn't want to go there again. He wanted to maximise his power as soon as he got it, and he knew the moment he was cast as Bond. He sets up a production company. This is before GoldenEye's Till Start Ringing, I think. But on the back of that, on the positive buzz...
This film isn't, but I think where we are in the story is that this film, remember, is 1999.
Yes, so he starts talking about it in interviews once GoldenEye is a success, and he's a prima facie welcome back to the bosom of Hollywood. 96, and I heard him in interviews saying, so I think it was Barron, so what's next, Pierce? And he goes, well, we've got a story about the oldest teddy bear in the world, Mr. Softy.
Hey, two world-class impressions for the price of one.
I know, they're not great, but I'm doing my best. And they didn't... Oh, you were being genuine? Oh, keep going.
No,
all right. So he, Mr. Softy, which didn't get made for whatever reason, but did actually sound very good. Disney animation. Pierce, you're missing out. Make it now. But then he said, and then there's going to be a remake of the Thomas Crown Affair. I just started laughing. I remember I was 15, 16, and I had seen the McQueen version. And the question...
That's what it is, though. It's not to do with can he play...
No.
In the abstract,
Yeah.
he's sensible casting for that kind of role.
Yes.
In fact, in some respects, he's better casting than Steve McQueen, but we'll get to that in a minute.
But this is where we get into
going up against the iconography of Steve McQueen
Yes.
when you are Pierce Brosnan.
That's right, and even Pierce acknowledged that himself. He goes, obviously, the bar we've set very high because you're going up against the king of cool, Steve McQueen. And I'm thinking, yes, why are you even bothering? And then I saw the film, and I was wiped out. I just thought, yes, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. There are things about it that one could pick apart, but wow.
I had a blast with it. When it came out, I didn't see it theatrically. I don't know why. I was in a relationship in that era, so obviously some things are informed by what the person you're with wants to do and all that sort of thing. But I remember not seeing it theatrically. must have seen it on a video or something like that a year or two later. So I'd have seen it, let's say for argument's sake, in about 2001.
Mm-hmm.
Hadn't seen it again until we prepped this show. It's been sat in my Netflix queue forever, but there was always something else to watch first.
Yes.
And I remember liking it, but I remember a lot of the appeal at the time was he was at his peak as Bond. Whether you like the films or not, Around the Time of the World Is Not Enough is probably about as good as he ever looked in the role, with the exception of a couple of terrible scenes that everyone knows about. He's actually pretty good in that film as well. The point is,
I wasn't going to do it because I'm trying to be nice about it. I'm trying to hold back.
Isn't that your motto? Yeah, no, I've taken the piss out of that a couple of times.
Everybody.
Yes, but I've taken the piss out of it on a show that's gone to round the world. So a lot of people have heard it.
Sexually inexperienced.
Inexperienced.
Huh?
Their take on Stockholm Syndrome is hysterically bad.
Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah.
An actor playing James Bond. Right, let's leave it. It's not fair. Sorry, Piers.
So as for this film,
Yes.
hang on just a second. I've got to look. I want just to quickly look this film up because I want to get the full sort of cast and crew up for a minute. Now, John McTiernan directed this.
Yes.
Now I knew it was John McTiernan, but I was blanking on the name, so that was one of the reasons I needed to look it up.
Because you don't associate him with this. You wouldn't think it was McTiernan.
No, this is too white collar for McTiernan.
And too soft.
Yeah, McTiernan's the best known for Die Hard.
And Predator.
He doesn't do like feelings and shit like that. And Predator, yeah.
And Red October.
Now, my overwhelming feeling when I watched this now, and sort of at the time, was a profound sense of loss for the 1990s version of the Bond franchise. Because two things. Firstly, this shows you could have cast a lot more age appropriate. The very same year this film came out in the summertime in the States. I can't remember when it came out here, to be honest. But it came out before The World Is Not Enough, but not that long before it.
Yeah.
So in this film, the character's dating 45, 46-year-old Rene Russo, when Pierce Brosnan himself at the time was 46, or turned 46 during filming, probably. So they're about the same age. And then, of course, by the time we get to The World Is Not Enough, he's back in bed with sort of Playmate of the Month. And I don't mean Sophie Marceau, I mean the other one. So firstly, it was like, what would have been wrong with having Rene Russo as a Bond girl? She actually would have been really pretty good casting for a sort of Christmas Jones character. Give her a different name, but an experienced, seasoned scientist, that would have made a lot more sense. But also, he and Rene Russo have palpable chemistry. And if you look at his run as Bond, he has chemistry with almost no one.
He has it with himself.
Yeah.
Put up a photo, Pierce. We need you to emote. We need you to show attraction. I can't do that at the moment, I'm afraid. Pierce, here's a picture of you looking beautiful and suave. Oh, yes. I'm feeling it.
He had some chemistry with Electra King, the Sophie Marceau character. Partly because, for all the faults of that script, the script sold me being fallen in love.
Sure.
So, yeah, I watch this film now, and I see a relaxed Brosnan. Brosnan used to try too hard as Bond and come off as a bit stiff.
Yes.
But I see him with someone age-appropriate,
yeah.
And you can be stunning in your 40s. There's absolutely no reason that beautiful has to be 20-something.
No.
And there's no reason it can't be 50-something either. It is who you cast.
60-something.
But, yeah, I mean, it depends who's playing Bond. But, theoretically, all these things are kind of possible. I understand that there's a trade-off with marketing the film and all the rest of it, but Rene Russo was a model. She was an extremely gorgeous woman, and she comes off smart as well. Whereas Denise Richards was 28 with fake tits and had absolutely nothing behind the eyes at all.
Except more tits.
But as for the film generally, it's a really good. It's a really good looking film. I mean, it is pretty beautiful actually. It's got a nothing score compared to the original. It's got a Bill Conti score. Bill Conti, best known for the Rocky films, also did For Your Eyes Only. The score is neither here nor there. It really isn't. But it's a good-looking film, and also I am sold Brosnan as this character in the abstract a lot better than I am Steve McQueen. Stephen Queen was much more suited to the daredevil aspects of the character.
Yes.
But basically, a bored, successful businessman, very white collar, exclusive New York offices or wherever it is. That's Pierce Brosnan more than it's Stephen Queen.
Oh, totally. And I think,
but also the crime they commit, we're sold he's got an interest in art.
Yep.
He keeps going to this gallery, which is near work. And
I just like my haystacks.
Yeah.
Sorry, I will stop doing it. But he wants to what? There's this lovely little tableau, and it is tableau in the sense of an acting performance that is delivered simply through a look. And this is where Pierce, I think, delivers some of the finest work of his career. In that he is one of those actors who can, when he's not trying, as you point out, not trying too hard, when he simply just allows himself to project physically, he shows the loneliness, the sadness, but at the same time almost the envy and determination of the character of Thomas Crown, just sat eating his sandwich watching that painting. And it's a beautiful thing.
He actually comes off as a little bit lonely.
Yeah. Beautiful.
It's not unlike, funnily enough, talking of Bond, it's not unlike Daniel in Skyfall sat in the National Gallery with this complete air about him before Q turns up of, why am I here again? You know, life is this overarching routine for him. He finds doing deals really easy. He has a deal early in the film that's sort of gone against him, but he's done really well out of it, strangely as well. So his life's a little bit empty, but he has this interest in art. This is a much more tactile Thomas Crown in a lot of ways. I mean, he's much more tactile with Rene Russo, not just because it's an R-rated film, but also this guy is much more aesthetically interested. He's much more. His home is beautiful in a way that the original Thomas Crown's home probably isn't.
Yeah.
And he's got art there, and in fact, there's a little Easter egg at the start of the film. But what's that piece of art called where you've got the guy in the bowler hat with the apple in front of his face? Anyway,
we'll stick it in the show notes. Everyone knows what it is.
That becomes a plot point later on. James will look it up for us. So they tailor his crime as something much more hands-on, because a man in his position has got a team of accountants and lawyers and everything else working for him. So to actually be able to do something himself would be important, just in the same way that gliding, that's something tactile you can do yourself.
Yes.
So, and Rene Russo is something tactile you can do yourself.
Ooh! For a big camp. But
anyway, the point is, the centerpiece crime of this is an art theft.
Yes.
And I just find that more beautiful to look at.
Mm-hmm.
I find it more interesting as a story point. I find it far more suited to the Thomas Crown character.
Yes.
And Thomas Crown character is better drawn here than in the 1968.
No, totally. Yeah.
And also, actually, that sort of impish playfulness that comes out in the plot as we go forward of, come on, he's just pissing around with us now, is actually suited to a Pierce Brosnan much more than stoic old Steve McQueen.
That's right. The moments where Pierce is congratulating himself with a drink and sort of saluting the painting that he's stolen in his office is a wonderful thing to watch. And that's how I think he was feeling about his life and career at the time. He'd had such, as a human story, the word inspirational is thrown around an awful lot where it shouldn't be. But
let's take the period 1986 to 1994.
He had a really shit time, didn't he?
Personally and professionally.
Yeah, he'd worked his arse off.
The professional bit is the thin end of the wedge. I mean,
yeah.
Just very briefly, although we're not time boxed, so we can talk about it as long as we like. But in 1986, he was offered the role of James Bond for The Living Daylights. Now, there's a whole story about that, and sorry to do cross promotion, but if you go to the Living Daylights episode of Do You Expect Us to Talk, I tell that story. It's quite a long time ago now, but I tell that story. He wasn't actually the first choice, but go get the details there. He was cast as James Bond in The Living Daylights. There was a 60-day period on Remington Steele, which had been cancelled for them to pick it up again if they needed to. Remington Steele was this show he was in for about 4 seasons. Again, I'll let you look it up, find the details. He moved to America and got his big break in this show. He moved there with his wife, Cassandra Harris, who was a few years older than him, and he'd adopted her kids. Life was good. They lived in Malibu. He had this well-paid career, and he's about to be James Bond. on the 58th day, I think it was, of this sort of turnaround period, the show got picked up again because there was interest in him as the new James Bond. So he had to drop out of doing The Living Daylights. That went to Timothy Dalton. They did 5 more episodes and it got cancelled. So by 1987, he's lost his biggest profile gig, which was a very popular show. Most people even now have heard of Remington Steele. He had lost the role of James Bond. That very year, his wife is diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She dies at the age of 43, I think it was, or something like that. I'd need to look it up. But Cassandra Harris died in 1991. And Pierce Brosnan's career was nothing. He was doing, apart from the Fourth Protocol in about 87, he did a load of like direct-to-DVD stuff. I mean, the highest profile he did in this period would have been either Lawnmower Man, which hasn't dated well, or a supporting role in Mrs. Doubtfire. So we get to 1994, the guy has lost his wife and to some degree his career and his way. And the other thing is, by that point, he's now in his 40s as well. And Pierce Brosnan was trading very much at this point on being a pretty boy. So it could well have been by this point that his best years were behind him.
Yeah.
And of course, what happens from 94 onwards proves that very wrong.
Yeah, and as I say, just as a human story, you know, regardless of where one ranks Pierce in the, you know, acting or Bond.
Utterly irrelevant.
Yeah, this is somebody who is all about hard work, moving forward, and aside from the very occasional moment of self-indulgent or self-congratulation that we all have, he's somebody who was very much about just getting on with it and making the best of what he had. And he was always very honest about those dark moments. And to some, I mean, I remember he was on Wogan, I think, talking about it and stuff like that. And there was a double standard because people would even talk about him as the guy who was almost James Bond. And then overnight it changes. And I remember just watching, I think I was 14, 15. So you're at the age where you're starting to think about adulthood.
What year were you born?
I was 79. So I was.
He was cast in the summer of '94. When was the year is your birthday?
So my birthday's November. I was 14 when he was cast, but I'm 14 approaching 15. So I was sort of, I don't know. Okay. So you were at the age.
He was cast as Bond in July '94.
Okay, so I was at the age where I'm thinking about adulthood and grown-ups and how they structure careers and things. I was actually quite obsessed with it in a weird way at sort of 14, 15. I had this and to watch him kind of just have this rebirth, and you could see the childlike enthusiasm in his eyes at getting to play Bond at this second chance, but at the same time the very adult and, dare one say, actually quite ruthless determination that had got him there, and that he knew in that split second, I have one chance again to...
I've got a finite period of maybe a decade if I'm lucky to get everything I can out of this.
Precisely. I mean, another example, although it's less through fate, more by chance, whatever, but Robert Downey, we talked about before, where he gets this new lease of life with Iron Man, and he himself said, I've got a decade with this, you know, I'm going to make the most of it. Iron Man, Sherlock Holmes, the works, I'm going to do action, I'm going to have some fun, I'm going to be me.
And I think that'll prove to be about right. I do think he'll be killed off during somewhere in the Infinity War saga.
You realise that if that happens, I'll be in mourning. I'll as long as they don't kill Pepper. If they kill Pepper Potts, I'll boycott.
We'll just do a show that's the pair of us howling for 2 hours.
Yes. On the other hand, yes, maybe kill them off so that they don't age.
Fine for the show. That's gays.
I'd rather do that than watch him die. That's for sure. Not that there's anything wrong with the gays. Where was I? But the Pierce Brosnan thing for me was always about, I just knew immediately that this was a guy who knew the value of hard work and who had the best of both worlds. Because one of the things I often, as you see as a friend on social media, is that I can be quite bifurcated in that one day I want to be desperately positive and touchy-feely and compassionate because that's genuinely who I am when you scratch the surface, or when you go beneath the surface, rather. But at the same time, I see this need...
I am learning I am drawn to very, very deeply warm people with incredibly prickly fronts.
Yes, yeah, that's... So, but Pierce... Yes, but Pierce is kind of the reverse of that in some senses, because watching him as a kid, I sort of thought, this is a man who obviously has a deep sense of compassion, who cares about the environment, who is a family man, who is a lovely, warm person, and yet, he's nobody's fool. And he's somebody who learned from the naive, by his own admission, the sort of the naive setbacks that he'd had to be a bit more ruthless. And what's also interesting is I saw a really obscure interview with him from... I think he's promoting Tomorrow Never Dies. I don't even think it should be on YouTube. I think it was somebody who put it up who really shouldn't have put it up. and I think there are some off-camera moments where he sort of says, "Yes, I was going to go and talk to Kevin McClory about bringing back Bond when it was off the screen." You're thinking, really? So on the one hand, he was very I don't know, the pawn or the victim, but
he does appear to have a business head on him.
yes.
If he doesn't have a business head on him, he's certainly got a vision in his mind.
Yeah, so the idea that he was ballsy enough to go and talk to McClory at a time when Bond was in the wilderness, post-License to Kill, shows a guy who was really going to go after this no matter what. He believes...
unrelated point, License to Kill is fucking brilliant, though.
It is. It wasn't. It was in wilderness just because of legalese. It was a bit like after Quantum of Solace. People think that big gap between Quantum of Solace and Skyfall was because of quality. It wasn't. It was because of money.
No, it's nothing to do with that. It was all to do with MGM's bankruptcy.
Yeah.
The gap after License to Kill was more dangerous because License to Kill hadn't done that well.
Yeah, and it was a
and
riskier
the Cold War
film.
ended in that time as well, so we could easily have lost Bond.
We could have. Thank God we didn't. But what I'm saying is that you see in the Thomas Crown affair, this is why it's such a perfect part for him in a way that even Bond potentially isn't. Thomas Crown certainly is played by Pierce and is designed by Pierce. Is very much a different character, I think, to the Steve McQueen one, insofar as, yes, he's acting out of boredom.
He's a much more appropriate character for what I think this guy would be.
Yeah.
Given where he is in life.
Well, I mean, for example, there isn't the violence. I mean, a bank robbery is a violent thing. Steve McQueen's Thomas Crown is violent.
One thing we didn't say, there's a thread in both films where he gets involved with the insurance investigator.
Yeah.
And he feels the need to test their loyalty by basically giving them all the details of a crime he's about to do, or at least make it very obvious. It's much less subtle in the 68 version in that it's not just hinting at it, it's telling her this is what's happening.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure in that second crime, if these bullets fly, people die in that.
Oh no, it's a nastier little film, and it's a nastier character. Whereas Pierce's one...
Pierce's Thomas Crown wouldn't hurt anymore.
No. Wouldn't hurt a fly. Although, on the other hand, there's a certain malicious glee that I think he does get out of framing a bunch of guys who are quite clearly criminal anyway. You know, the guy who he trips up? Yeah. You know, he just puts... And there's a little bit of... So, yeah, it's... But the politics of it are more...
script as well. When you think about them stealing the painting, he basically changes the environmental conditions of the room with a heater that he's carrying in a briefcase, so that the cameras or the sensors can't tell the difference between bodies and walls. That's smart, you know. It's a smart, sexy, clever film. They also dress Pierce extremely well. I mean, it's said incorrectly that the incumbent Bond can't wear a tux in a film outside of the Bond genre. I'm not sure that's quite true. But certainly they put Pierce, for the dancing scene, they put Pierce in this like $7,000 suit. And they really do capitalise on two good-looking leads without trying to minimise their age. No one's trying to convince us they're 21 and pretty people, but
no.
They are two very, very good-looking 40-somethings.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's wonderful that they did that. I mean, the one thing that we're going to disagree about is the nature of the sort of the sexual interaction, because yes, there's chemistry, but I think they'd have even better chemistry if they hadn't, for some reason, decided to enforce her sense of strength or sexuality through things like knuckle dusters and threatening to break people's legs and stuff. And the sex is a little bit more explicit than it is in the McQueen version.
A little bit, it's a lot more.
Okay, it's a lot more explicit, and yet at the same time, somehow...
It took me by surprise the first time I saw it.
Yeah, but at the same time, somehow, weirdly enough...
This is, at this point, because he's James Bond, an A-lister.
Yeah.
There's certainly, I would say, a B-lister in Rennie Russo. And there's like, I don't think there's full throttle nudity, but there's certainly toplessness and all the rest of it. It was a bit more than I was expecting it to be at the time.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you see more, and yet you also see less. In a weird way, is what I'm saying.
I would swap, I would swap any of it. I know she looked pretty good, actually, but no, I would probably... And this isn't like less is more always, because it isn't always. No. But there is nothing to match that chest kick, nothing.
I prefer her...
The closest we get is the dance. The dance between them is really, really sensual.
It is, even though you don't actually see him dance. And he, do you want to dance? Or do you want to dance? And it appears...
She dances.
She dances, yes, to be fair.
Yeah.
And they did try the chess scene. They did try... This is where Pierce once again is so endearing. He did actually admit, yes, we did try and remake the chess scene, but we just gave up.
You know what he'd have done, though? He'd have pursed his lips and narrowed his eyes.
Yes! Gone, oh.
I'm surprisingly turned on here. No, I turned into Duke McGuire.
Father Ted. Well, it's around the same era. They're the same, And actually, Father Dougal had a sex scene once. I can't believe it. Not as Father Dougal. I remember being terribly shocked.
I don't remember that.
It was a show called Big Bad World or something, and he plays a writer in it, and it was a bit to sort of undo the Father Dougal thing. He was desperate to do something completely different, and there's a sex scene in it. And I wasn't expecting. I just thought I never want to see that again. It's just, I cannot be unseen.
My version of that, my version of is that person was when I was at university. The Acid House came out.
Right.
I think it's the Acid House. I might be getting confused with a different film.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of these vignette style things where there's 3 or 4 different stories, which there was tons of post-Pulp Fiction. But Martin Clunes, right in the middle of his men behaving badly, right?
Yes.
He's fucking quite aggressively doing some woman doggy style in it. And
Right.
I just sat there is that what I fucking think it is?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, for me, as I say, I appreciate, once again, I can be objective about this and stand outside myself for a second. I know that if everybody else is saying, look, James, Thomas Crown, the Pierce Brosnan version, has some lovely sex in it and they have lovely chemistry, and I'm the only dissenter, then I'm...
Do you reckon the director said that when he yelled cut?
Well, probably, yeah, that was some great sex, Now, that's what I call fucking...
You know what? It gives the film one thing.
What?
It does give the film one thing. That chemistry changes with someone after you've had sex with them.
Yes.
Right? Not necessarily for the worse, but it just takes some of the tension away.
No, tell me about it. And they were always disappointed, too. I don't know what they were expecting.
In a room together where people don't know when the room catches fire, that stops happening.
I get that all the time, but,
Yeah, right, anyway, no. But the point is, after they have sex, they're sat on that veranda, and he keeps referring to a painting that might be it or might not be.
Yes.
And they're drinking together and all the rest of it, and they have that sort of post-coital glow and relaxation around each other.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that's giving context because we saw that they had sex, and we actually saw them, this sounds awful, we saw them release some of that tension.
Yeah, but Pierce is actually very, Pierce is terrible at choreographing sex, but he's great at post-sex. There's a scene in GoldenEye, sorry to keep bringing up Bond, but when he's just lying with Natalia in the hut, he's so good at the tender post endorphin release.
Because he's inherently quite a tender guy.
Yeah, because he's a nice guy and because he's a beautiful man, and you see when you get to see that beauty on screen.
Whereas I don't believe Roger Moore would even still be there. He'd be in a taxi, wouldn't he?
I'm terribly sorry, darling, but a psychotic man has just entered the room. I'll just dispose of him, and then I'll get a taxi and I'll leave you a bottle of Bolly or something.
What the fuck's a couple?
Well, there you go.
Genuinely, I'm not saying we need the sex per se.
Yeah.
But knowing they've had sex, I can very rarely justify a sex scene in a film because when particularly actresses are asked about nudity and they say, if it's needed for the plot and all the rest of it, and you go, it's never needed for the plot. It's written in out of choice. Tarantino's done how many really violent films? Never really done a sex scene because he has done one actually, but that was more comedic. I think Jackie Brown was one, but that's kind of comedic. It's never needed, but actually I can defend it here as needed in terms of framing the change in their chemistry.
Yes.
Because it's completely post-coital afterwards.
Yeah. For me, in terms of Renee, I think when she's because in Lethal Weapon 3, which I know a lot of people hate.
Sex, of course, because I'm not married.
No. But in Lethal Weapon 3, she has this ability to be very strong, but very feminine. So she's kung fu kicking and stuff, but she's not overdoing the look I'm a strong woman thing. She's not taking out knuckle dusters or threatening to break Mel Gibson's arms or whatever. So my slight, and I appreciate, as I say, Dave, I can step outside myself and realise that no one else in the entire world except me is saying this, therefore I'm probably wrong.
No, I'm about to agree with you. There's a couple of scenes in this film
yeah.
where you just go, in isolation, she was a complete asshole in that scene.
Yeah, and to be fair, I'm not...
the scenes where she's with Thomas Crown, though. It's the scenes where she's with other cops.
Yeah, like Dennis Leary, particularly.
Yeah, she talks to Dennis Leary like shit, actually.
And Dennis Leary, bizarrely, he's good in it, but there's this scene at the end where he's letting Thomas Crown off, and he's letting her go away, saying, yeah, you two lovers have to go away because it's meant to be. But then he gives this monologue, apropos nothing. I don't know whether Leary's agent said, look, we don't want to make Leary look like a complete wally, so we've got to give him something where it indicates some depth or something. So he goes, I once had this week where I got left by my partner, so I beat up some suspects, fucked 10 women or whatever it is, and you just think, in a film that's been other...
2 days or something.
Yeah, and I just thought, in a film that's been otherwise so endearing and polished and classy, why? Why throw that in? I mean, what does that in any way add to...
That's a character that's been a little bit underserved, but the other thing is, I think a lot of the problem is, she's the smartest person in the room. The film continually keeps telling us she's the smartest person in the room. Leary never really gets that close to catching Thomas Crown, actually. No. And so, actually, something that proves that he's somewhat smart and has some depth to him might be of some use. Otherwise, stereotypically, if Rene Russo's in the room with a load of men of around the same age, you'll just see them through the prism of wanting her, probably.
Yeah, and that's overdone as well.
It's not great. It's not brilliant,
but you know, every film has to have some rough edges. Oh, also Pierce, or whoever wrote this, Oxford, as in Oxford, UK, does not have a boxing scholarship. Just for the record, I don't know why they threw that in, and the idea that they had to make him, yes, I came from wee Glasgow and learning how to talk. So
you do not sound like you're from Glasgow.
Yes. Maybe that was a nod to Sean Connery, because Sean was offered Thomas Crown, not this one.
I was going to say he wouldn't have been offered this one, but...
Well, he could have been, because Entrapment comes out the same year and has similar things. And I remember the Empire magazine review at the time saying...
Too old by then,
that's what Empire said. They said, look, if you have to see one...
He's about the same age as Steve McQueen would be, in that they were both born in 1930, so... Yeah, the 68 version he could have been in the mix for.
Yeah.
The thing is, he was neither fish nor fowl at that point.
Yeah.
Because the 1963-64 Connery, full-on James Bond mode, is one thing. And then you got the sort of 70s version, which is a lot rougher around the edges.
Zardoz.
How does his Thomas Crown look in 1968?
Fat, annoyed.
He wasn't in great shape for You Only Live Twice the previous
He's
year.
in better shape in Entrapment than he is in You Only Live Twice.
I agree with that. Yes,
bizarrely, the thing is, we're all living longer now, so it feels...
People don't take as good care of themselves generally.
Yes.
We might have all that. We might have them not in the younger group anymore, but we don't have. You don't necessarily have the natural advantages of youth.
No.
Like a Rene Russo would probably take better care of her skin than like a Jennifer Lawrence, just age, experience, and needing to look after yourself.
And yet, funnily enough, if you were doing, and this is a question sort of before we transition into the other stuff, if you were remaking it again, or if you were doing a sequel or a prequel, because I mean, Pierce did try and get a sequel. I mean, Pierce's version does well enough for him to look at a sequel.
I can't remember what that would have been called.
The Top Cappy Affair or something.
That's it, Top Cappy. That's it. I was hoping you'd know the word.
Right.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen because basically the plug gets pulled on his Bond, and I remember one of the this is where his story kind of zigzags in life, as life does. He goes from ultra happy and ultra on top of the world to once again there's a setback, because I remember he was being asked about when they didn't know if he was going to do another Bond post Die Another Day, but it was clear the writing was on the wall, really, without meaning to echo to Sam Smith's movie. And he said, yes, I was at a meeting at MGM the other day pitching Thomas Crown 2, and they said, Pierce, we've got to sort this out. We need, are you going to do another Bond? It is. But it's gone. It's stopped. So yeah. So Pierce was.
We don't edit this show, so we've got to nip these things in the bud like quickly.
We can have wee breaks, all sorts. Yes. So
Pierce
was going to. He was desperate to do. Well, not desperate, but he was keen to do Thomas Crown 2, and I think there was a story and a script, and I think in retrospect it's a good thing they didn't, because realistically speaking, if you do go that route, what is he then other than just a B-list James Bond? Insofar as you have to have a different woman, you have to have a different caper, the whole premise of the thing kind of gets lost. And to be
Thomas Crown is not it's plot driven, it isn't character driven.
But it is also a character study insofar as it finishes.
Because it's driven out of the sort of person that he is.
Yeah.
But it's all about how that drives that situation.
But it's also about his need to reform. It's about his need to reform out of that. And I think both Thomas Crowns, both the McQueen and the Brosnan versions, don't lend themselves well to sequels, because his arc finishes at the end where he realises, actually, I don't need to do this anymore, or I've been beaten, or I have won enough, I'm bored.
And he gets his woman, obviously in the remake he does anyway.
Yeah, and in the first one he doesn't want her anyway, probably. But so, yeah, the Pierce sequel didn't happen for whatever reason, probably reasons of, I don't know.
I just want to say, before we go any further on that, the way he evades justice at the end is a brilliant set piece.
Oh yeah, with Cinnamon.
You've basically got everyone. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
You've got everyone in that. He's got several basically doubles in the art gallery with him.
It's not the name of the painting; it's the name of the song. It's now so overused in everything. The Nina Simone Cinnamon. It's used now on every advert, every piece of television, but it was a really clever piece.
Pierce Brosnan and bowler hats don't really go together, but it's a great scene.
No, but then James Bond isn't allowed to wear one anymore either. So,
Well, he never did. He wear a bowler hat.
Well, he had a hat that he
He
used.
wore like a trilby or fedora or something.
Yeah. Be interesting though, wouldn't it? I suppose the Avengers, Kingsman, they have one. But so yeah, would there have been sequel potential or reboot potential if you were doing it today? Who would you put in the Faye Dunaway? Well, you mentioned Jennifer Lawrence. She'd actually be really interesting as the.
Too young still.
Is she?
Too young still.
Yeah.
I need someone. You need someone who's approaching their sort of
40s.
a peak.
Right.
So, yeah, they need to be sort of 38 and up, probably.
So you're talking one of mine.
Although Faye Dunaway wasn't that, to be fair, but Faye Dunaway has always been sort of a uniquely self-assured woman.
Yeah.
She's always been a bit timeless.
Yeah.
Who would I cast in this now? I don't know.
There was talk of a television series, and there was talk of, interestingly,
Depends how old the leading man is. Because my first thought is a Kate Blanchett or something.
Oh, you mean go with a woman? Make a woman?
No, I'm talking about the Faye Dunaway one.
Oh, right. Who's that? Michael B. Jordan wants to do it.
He's too young.
He is too young. That's the whole point, because there's no way that kid, unless he's
I wondered why Michael B. Jordan was on my fucking image search for the Thomas Crown affair.
Yeah.
He must have given interviews on it then.
He might just want to produce it, though. He must surely know that he's only 20-something, isn't he?
No, he's in his 30s now.
Okay, maybe. But
10 years' time, he can do it.
yeah, it's like for. I mean, I'm not one of the people dissing the Han Solo spin-off, but yeah, but I don't like Donald Glover. It's like Donald Glover, who's a bit like Michael B. Jordan's age group, is now the young Lando, and I just kind of think even that's probably still too young for that, because
it depends when it's set, isn't it?
I guess so, but you just want that distinction.
Play young me, you go, well, they're too young. Well, what year's it set though?
Yeah, fair point.
I don't know.
But no one, I can't think of a 40-something leading man who could pull off either the kind of the exquisite sort of chiseled refinement of Pierce or the rugged, rough bullishness of McQueen. I can't think that we don't have an equivalent of either.
No, we don't.
There are people who think they've got that.
Yeah, I know, because my mind runs to a Downey or something, but he's far too busy an actor for that role.
And he's now getting too old, probably.
And he's now getting too old as well.
Much as it pains me to say that, I don't want it. I can't believe I just heard myself say that, because I.
But then if you'd said to me before the remake, Pierce Brosnan, I'd have said no, that's not right, because I'd be going through the prism of like Steve McQueen. He's nothing like Steve McQueen.
Yeah.
So there's always room for somebody with a bit more vision than you or I to come in and redefine it.
Yeah.
So why not a Michael B. Jordan with a Jennifer Lawrence? But my gut feeling is they're a bit too young. Yeah.
Give them 10 years.
Give them at least 5. Certainly,
Yeah.
Probably 10.
Yeah. I mean, she also reminds me of Meryl Streep in the sense that she has a similar syndrome to Meryl Streep in the sense that every script that goes through Hollywood goes to her fingerprints first. She looks a bit like Meryl in Plenty.
She's been miscast a number of times.
Yeah.
Now, because she's a name, they put her in like Joy a couple of years ago, which admittedly she was Oscar nominated for, but she was just a miscast. She was way too refined and way too young for that role.
She is lovely, though. Complete nutter, by her own admissions, completely mad. But she would eat a burger with you, ride a horse, watch the sports in an action movie. You could be in a hotel room. Yep.
I think we should focus on one or two things.
It's fairly safe to say that Jennifer Lawrence is probably quite adventurous in a certain area, which is fine and terrific and her thing. But I have a sneaking suspicion that she would laugh at a man's best. Like, he could be using every trick in the sexual lexicon from Genesis of the universe through to stuff that hasn't even been invented yet, and she'd still go there and go, yeah, well, that's your best, okay, fine, whatever, and then she'd like.
The problem is, it's whether they cast for commerce or because the character has to be deeply smart. This is an insurance investigator called in on a percentage of the losses, which are millions.
Okay.
So you've got to call someone in who's capable of regaining you those millions and worth those sorts of fees. You don't want some just pretty girl.
No, but I think, Lawrence convinces as an intellect. I mean, she does convince as someone who could be clever.
But she's still a bit young. She's still
but she's also temperamental as well, and she plays temperamental by her own admission. You're not going to cast her as somebody who's, I would think, a clinical professional.
No, but if you follow the arc of this film in any way, shape or form, Thomas Crown at some point will hurt her.
Yeah.
She plays hurt better than most actresses.
Yes, she does. She cries well, and and she can trash a room well and cut your balls off afterwards. That could be the twist. Like, instead of Thomas Crown winning or going off in the sunset, it's her movie, which would be very in fitting with the zeitgeist, which is making women, it doesn't mean that men... This is why I get so annoyed about things like people talking about, the move towards female empowerment. It's not female empowerment. It's human empowerment. It's about saying you can still tell stories where the man is important. You can still tell a story where the man is an adventure hero, whatever it is. But it just means that the way into it, for a change, could be the woman.
I do think quite often you come off like you're having an argument with yourself.
Me? Oh.
Yeah. Like you debate to go, people say this, and I've got to...
Can we just add, I'm not actually hearing voices, but yes, it can come across a little bit. Not that there's anything wrong with hearing voices. If you are hearing voices that are not on this podcast, and you don't have people in the room with you, obviously do get some sort of...
The one thing I do want to say about the 1999 Thomas Crown affair is they cast two leads, aged 45 and 46. And
yes.
Actually, that's perfect. And
we need more of that.
They would have the balls to do that, more often, but certainly if you ever remake this film again.
Which, is a possibility. What about a sequel? I mean, would you have watched a sequel?
Yeah, I'd go and watch the sequel, I imagine. I liked the original well enough, the remake, but I liked the 99 film well enough that had they come out with another one in 04 or 05, I'd have gone to it. Yeah. So, do
you think McQueen would have done another one? Like, if he'd been asked 10 years later if he'd survived or whatever, McQueen comes back
by the late 70s, he wasn't working very much. I mean, if you mean literally 10 years, he wasn't doing much. Sort of post sort of the Towering Inferno kind of era.
Yeah.
He went very quiet in the few years that followed that. I don't know that was ill health. I'm not quite sure why that was. He almost kind of semi-retired.
Yeah.
Just go to his filmography a minute and just see where that break actually happens.
I think money was a big deal. He didn't like being shafted over money.
The Towering Inferno was 1974, and he didn't do another film until 1978. And in fact, he only did 3 in total after that point.
Right.
So the Thomas Crown affair is 12 years before he dies. And yet, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He only did 11 films thereafter anyway. The next one being Bullet, which is probably the first thing I think of when I think of him.
Yeah. So, of the two, if you had to pick between the two, which is your favourite of the two Thomas Crowns? If you absolutely had to pick.
It's a pretty clear win for the 99 version. I think it's a knee-jerk thing to say that remakes are always worse or whatever. Judged on its merits, I mean, it's cleared a pretty high bar, really, when you think about it. For the very things Brosnan talked about I'm going up against Steve McQueen, and on paper it does look like no chance. Steve McQueen and Faye Dunaway, an iconic film directed by Norman Jewison, who is one of the greats. But the 99 version is just a better film. It's a better plotted film. There is better chemistry between the leads, even if it has nothing as incendiary as that chess match. It's put a bit more time into the character work. It's put a bit more thought into his crime. It's put a bit more thought into why he's committing the crime.
Yeah,
I think it's a better film.
Yeah, and I think as Bond fans as well, it is interesting as a what might have been. I think you made that very interesting point at the beginning where you sort of said, this does show to some extent what a Pierce Brosnan Bond movie could have been if he had been allowed maybe to play a little bit to his strengths, if he perhaps hadn't been playing catch up, and but when Pierce talks about what his Bond could have been, there's always this assumption which he makes, and it's an erroneous assumption that his failing was in not making it tougher or more gritty. It's not so much that. It's in the sense that if he'd been allowed to make it more organic, if he'd been allowed to give it more that kind of character, emotional stuff that I think he was after, and The World Is Not Enough, which comes out the same year, as you pointed out, has elements of that, just little glimpses. And this is Pierce very much at his peak. We talked about it.
I mean, we've joked about it already tonight, so let's try and address it without taking the piss out of it.
Yeah.
Just because I normally can't help myself. But there's a couple of sequences in The World Is Not Enough where he's not very good. But that negates the fact there's 118 minutes in the film where he is pretty good.
Yeah.
I think it's his strongest performance as Bond. But you have to remember, the one thing I must say about Brosnan is, firstly,
the perception of what a Bond should be was very different back then. I know we had Dalton, but Dalton wasn't commercially as successful as they would have liked.
No.
But also, there was more pressure on GoldenEye than possibly any other Bond film that has ever been released for it to work. The Spy Who Loved Me, maybe, because The Man with the Golden Gun was a big flop. But I think we can forgive him being a little bit stiff and nervy in the role.
Yeah.
But having said that, a lot of Bond's appeal is his connection with the opposite sex. Whether you buy into any of that stuff or not, he's supposed to be effortlessly charming. And it does make me laugh when people say, oh, Craig's too brutish or he's not suave enough. And I'm thinking, actually, Craig has a far, far more chemistry on average with his leading ladies than Brosnan ever did. This sort of film tells you he can do it. The film that really tells you the guy's range is, for me, The Tailor of Panama, a couple of years afterwards.
Yeah.
Because the guy is like an absolutely charming bastard in that film.
I think that's kind of the curse of Pierce in some senses, is that if you look at his back catalogue, or even some of his recent stuff,
he's better when he plays bastards.
He's better when he either plays. I mean, an analogy I'd give. I can't believe I'm even. This isn't to flatter this particular actor, but David Tennant. I know you're not a huge Doctor Who fan, but I think David Tennant is an actor who's very good at playing either completely evil, as in like complete bastard, or basically lovely Doctor Who. But he's not good at sort of the everyman mix of the two. And it's quite a theatrical way of acting. And I think with Pierce, it's not dissimilar in the sense that I love watching Pierce when he's warm and fuzzy and kind of, emotionally involved. Like Dante's Peak, where he's got lovely moments of... Well, I mean, we'll get to Dante's Peak in another podcast, but or completely kind of ruthless, raw... You mentioned Fourth Protocol.
We're going to be discussing the politics of volcanoes.
Well, disaster management, that sort of thing, which is a real concern.
Does that mean we're doing the Tower and Inferno?
Yeah, totally. Another area where Pierce and Steve overlap.
I'll locate this at some point, but I don't remember.
Fourth Protocol as well, which you mentioned, and you mentioned it off the cuff. He's more Bond in Fourth Protocol, which sadly comes out, I think, the same year as The Living Daylights, than he would have been had he done The Living Daylights. And it is interesting to think about the what might have been. With Steve McQueen, obviously, he was never a Bond candidate, but I think one thing we've established is that the thing about McQueen is that he is, in and of himself, a character. That's not to do down him as an actor, but it is to say that when we think of Steve McQueen, he has his own iconography, he has his own cool charisma, and almost brand to some extent. He's the kind of image that one throws out when they're trying to look cool and removed and sexy and earthy and all of those things at once. And the blue collar versus white collar dynamic that is very much in his Thomas Crown and is very much in a lot of his performances, including Great Escape, where he's an army officer that he's in the cooler and happier there playing baseball on his own. So yeah, I'm in agreement with you on that. The 99 version is the more psychologically interesting and sophisticated. But that first one in the 60s with McQueen is the one that starts it all off. Where it goes from there, I don't know.
If someone offered you a poster for your wall, or a piece of artwork that was any still of that film, you would pick dozens, if not hundreds, from the 68 film before you would pick anything from 99.
That's right.
But it's a better film.
And we're agreed that probably in retrospect, even though reboots and so on could have happened or could still happen, give it 10 years, as a character, it's a one and done. This is not somebody that we can see further adventures of, because the film is about, if you like, his lack of adventure and then his desire for it, and to some extent the consequences of that, and him kind of having to address that. This is not an adventure serial.
It's actually about a man finding the type of adventure he wants.
Yeah.
Because he's kind of brave in business. We see both versions of the characters glide. That's inherently quite dangerous in itself.
Yeah.
So it's actually a man experimenting with the kind of thrills he wants.
Yeah.
Not necessarily searching thrills full stop.
I did try and pitch Irish Dreamtime as sort of a prequel idea when they weren't getting their act together. Well, I mean, no offence to Pierce, because he did try, as I said earlier on, to pitch the sequel. But I at one stage sort of said you could go back. You could do Thomas Crown, the first heist, and you could do something. I don't know, if you're so obsessed with him being in an Oxford graduate, why don't you do it in universe? Cast one of Pierce's sons. And I knew that one day Pierce was about to address the Oxford Union And I'd left Oxford at that stage, but I thought, well, I'll try and fix something up. So I phoned Irish Dreamtime. I didn't actually make the pitch over the phone, but I sort of said, look, this is where it might go.
Do you push your balls around in a wheelbarrow?
What do you mean? What does that mean?
But you just, your balls the size of church bells. This is about the fifth story you've told me of, like, unless they're bullshit.
No, they're true stories.
You pitched Eon as well, didn't you?
I didn't pitch them as such. I just, when I was trying to do some theatre or something, I thought Bond on stage. And the weird thing about it is, or rather the good thing about it, is that Eon are partly, not despite, but because they're a family unit, they're very approachable. If you ultimately figure out the mechanisms of how that company works, you'll cross over.
I guess Irish Dreamtime would be the same. They're smaller. They're a production outfit, but just based around getting interesting projects for Pierce Brosnan.
But I mean, you mentioned balls, and you mentioned bullshit, and you mentioned hustle. That's exactly what they said on the phone to me. They said, look, James. They said, if you're trying to hint at the fact that you've got some sort of appointment with either Pierce Brosnan or Beau Sinclair, that is quite ballsy, and it's good bullshit, but it is bullshit. And the guy on the phone said, look, James, I don't mean to be brutal about this. He said, but if you really want to push something like this, you've got to hustle out there in Hollywood just like anybody else, which is exactly what I'd have to do. I do think there's something in it. I do think that it doesn't have to be Thomas Crown, but the idea of white collar versus blue collar and the idea of victimless crime, because I think it's one of the interesting things, we'll get onto this now as we approach the gentleman thief concept. Is there such a thing as a victimless crime? I mean, obviously these are just movies and they're fantasies, but I think it's the Dennis Leary character points out, if someone wants to steal a couple of swirls of paint that are only important to people who make millions, is that really a villain? Is that really a robber? I mean, the McQueen version, I think, is slightly more brutal in the sense that it's bank robbery and people do get, to some extent, hurt.
They do get hurt in that. And it's also the assumption that if you steal from an ostensibly rich entity, there are no victims to that.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a tough call, just politically.
But insurance arms have gone down over the years. Lloyd's of London.
Yeah, and people lose jobs.
So there are crimes that are big enough that there just isn't enough on the balance sheet to cope with it. Not only that, I mean, even if you don't take the company down, well, in this era of publicly floated companies, if you get to the stage where you could be issuing a profits warning, that means redundancies. So
Carillion that went down, for US listeners, this is a UK company that went down this week.
It basically provides a lot of services in the public sector, the public sector being government sector, if you like. Carillion were our cleaning and facilities contractors when I was a civil servant.
Yeah.
Basically, they came in and suddenly the toilet paper was much easier to put your finger through, that sort of thing.
Well, these things can be easily...
shit. But having said that, when people go under, it's cleaners. The people that get hurt aren't the millionaires. So is there such a thing as a victim with this crime? Possibly there is, but the criminal perpetrating that crime can't really have any way to know that.
Yeah.
And I think trying to test the boundaries of whether there's victims or not is an inherently dangerous game. Yeah. So I kind of like to keep crime to the sort of boundaries of, certainly in terms of thieving and that sort of thing. It's fine as a Hollywood story. Are there victimless crimes? I'm sure there are dozens of examples if I thought about it. But the sorts of crimes that are represented in this film, it's been an insurance investigator was sent along. Even in the '68 version, the losses were, was it 5 million or something like that? That's 50 years ago, nearly.
Yeah.
About 50 years ago this year. Can companies absorb that? They can, and they do. But as soon as anything starts hurting the bottom line, certainly in this day and age, it tends to be the little people that get the first to face the bullet.
Yeah. And it's Hollywood kind of likes to dance around that, and particularly, I mean, the other argument is that if he's in mergers and acquisitions, that in and of itself is a sort of legalized piracy or theft.
Well, yeah, because there's always what gets euphemistically termed rationalising.
Yeah.
When you merge and you merge, you've got two finance officers. You no longer need two finance officers. One of them gets the boot.
Yeah.
You've got two stores across the road from each other. You only need one. So maybe maybe not half, but certainly close to half of the staff get the boot. Yeah, absolutely. But we have to remember that this is escapism.
Yes.
And the 99 version of Thomas Crown at least goes the more victimless route, although in reality that's not an absolute term.
No.
In that he doesn't physically hurt anybody.
No.
Either getting the painting out or putting it back. No. Nobody actually gets hurt in that film. And actually the film ends with the painting where it should be, although he steals a different one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that leads us into the Gentleman Thief theory then.
To go that route. The 68 film doesn't.
So movies generally like this idea of sort of the lovable rogue, the Gentleman Thief, and that's why I've brought two others to the table, sort of bookend movies. Maverick, which is from 1994, starring Mel Gibson and done by the whole Lethal Weapon team, Richard Donner, etc. And The Saint, which is a 1997 curiosity, starring Val Kilmer, which I know you are not a fan of as such. But if we start with Maverick, you can see kind of why I brought him to the table.
Absolutely, it is this idea that some kind of that some kinds of dishonesty, if you like, are kind of impish fun.
Yeah.
And it kind of is. The film's like the yeah. Well, maybe we'll get on to what we feel about the film in a minute. There is no reason, in some respects, that this couldn't have been a successful series of films. What the film actually tells me is it is a TV series. I can see why Maverick was made its name as a TV series. Because it's inherently very suited to little short-term scrapes and adventures that are of no real consequence.
Yep.
So they're suited to like that week's episode, as opposed to like a 2 or 3 yearly motion picture franchise.
Yep.
In terms of my feelings about the film, it's amazing how the 90s, but very specifically the mid-90s, and I mean sort of 93 through about 97. You can place films within that era now, even period pieces. I don't know if it's the lenses or film stock they were using, but this looks so mid-90s it hurts. It really does. I liked... I've seen it once before and enjoyed it, because my recollection was it wasn't very well received and didn't do that well. And then I saw it and thought, I can't see the problem here. Like, Mel Gibson is perfect for this. And Jodie Foster and him had some chemistry as well. So I just thought, this is really good. I watched it again this time, and it's an absolutely nothing film, isn't it?
It's filler in the sense that, you know, in the same ways you get
Well,
filler scenes.
All the scenes are like busy work until it's time to go to the next set piece.
I think that
scene to scene is filler. Yeah.
I think its main. It's interesting that you said this could, or indeed maybe should have been a series, because I remember when it was gearing up, and I can literally remember the article in what's sadly now folded. I used to love it, the US Premiere magazine.
Oh, I know it.
And they did the summer preview, and they did sort of the annual power lists, which were always fixtures I looked forward to. And one of them was when they were talking about Maverick, and Premiere didn't know quite where to rank it in the summer blockbuster predictions, because it sort of said, yes, on paper it has a lot going for it. And it quoted Richard Donner saying, they should make 4, 5, 17 of these. We could be doing these for years. These are great.
That's a man that only thinks in terms of motion pictures, though.
Yeah. But Premiere was sort of saying, hang on, guys, this lacks the Lethal Weapon firepower. That precise phrase stuck in my head. And I had it in my head as I was watching. I was thinking, really, really what's happened here is you think that you've made enough Lethal Weapon, but really what Maverick will lead to, and what it does lead to ultimately, is Lethal Weapon 4, because it's basically, what's missing from it is the fact that it's not Lethal Weapon.
They even cram in Danny Glover, and the bit where they look at each other, some comment about being too old for this shit, and then looking at each other and thinking, and then going, nah. And I just think, like, you're mythologizing your own filmography there, Mr. Donner.
Yes.
You know what I mean? This is a Richard Donner film. We made all the Lethal Weapon films, along with the first couple of Superman films as well. Well, the first one, technically, but that's another story. I just found that a little bit embarrassing. I just thought, well, 20 years on, who's going to get that out of context unless they are acutely aware it's a Richard Donner film and who Richard Donner is. But the main thing about the film in general was it's one of those films that you could, if you're watching it at home on your TV. I didn't try this. I did concentrate, but you could go out and make tea, coffee, do whatever, make yourself a sandwich, come back, watch. Find you're midway through another set piece. Watch that set piece. Watch a bit of the next one. Think, is this one entertaining me? No. I'll just see what my emails are doing. Then it's not a film that actually requires your attention because it's a series of like little vignettes. Really, most of them built around a bit of slapstick and farce. And it is basically one guy trying to get from one place to another in order to take part in a card game. And the film thinks it's much, much smarter than it is because it kind of supposedly double crosses our expectations a few times. But they're either blatantly obvious or where they're not obvious, because spoiler alert, James Garner, the TV Maverick, is actually his father in this. When that came out, it just felt a bit pulled out of their arse anyway. Didn't really matter. It was like, oh, by the way, it's his dad. Oh, all right, okay. So
there was an attempt, I think, to do a sort of an Indiana Jones on it, and I think it was also an attempt to sort of say, well, Mel Gibson is basically the heir to James Garner, to the extent that there was even talk of, instead of doing a Maverick sequel, a Rockford Files movie starring Mel Gibson, which I don't know, maybe it would have been excellent, but
my feeling is the Rockford Files would have had a little bit more cultural penetration. I'm not sure.
It would have been more recent. And actually, if you look at Mel
Possibly.
Gibson in Payback, which was initially called Parker or Porter or something, in that leather jacket shot, he does look a bit like Jim Garner in the Rockford Files.
Yeah,
so maybe that was mooted, but it's also.
I'm hearing myself. Sort your headphones out.
Oh, hang on. Oh, I'm stepping on something. Can you hear? Can you stop hearing yourself?
Hang on. No, still hearing.
Oh, well, if I just turn off the microphone.
Yeah.
Can you hear me and hear yourself?
I can hear you.
Cool.
I can't hear myself.
You
I'm
can't
still
hear.
hearing myself a bit. No, it's gone. Just go on.
Okay, so, and it's also meant to be a romance, I think, which doesn't really work because although Jodie Foster and Mel Gibson were still are, I believe, lifelong friends at the time, partly because of that.
She cast him in that really weird film when he was right at the peak of his No One Could Touch Him. Was it called The Beaver or something like that?
That's one of Jennifer Lawrence's first movies, I think.
Yeah, that'd be about right. On time frame, that would be about right.
Yeah. So they were friends, and as a result of that, I think partly sadly there's no chemistry. In the sense that
I disagree. I don't think it's sexual chemistry, but I think they have quite strong chemistry actually.
Yeah, but I think
the problem is any perception of their chemistry is
coloured.
Is coloured by what I know of the two people.
Right.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Not in a pejorative or nasty way, but
no.
I do struggle to see chemistry between Jodie Foster and men now because
I know
she has no chemistry with men. That's romantic.
But
but at the time, yeah, I can sort of see it.
Yeah, but I mean, for me, when I talk about chemistry, it's not so much even between them. It's just that Jodie, by her own admission, and even today, even as recently as a couple of weeks ago, and she's been once again misquoted about this. She is somebody who has done the occasional thriller or the occasional popcorn movie, of which maybe Maverick can be counted. But her MO is to make quite serious, self-contained auteur productions, which is her selling point because she is a highly, highly intelligent human being. And I think, therefore, you can almost see that while she's having a bit of fun, it's simply not the genre to which she's best suited. And I think when one considers...
She is really, really odd casting. She's pretty good because she has pretty good comedic timing, all the way back to, like, Bugsy Malone, when she was, like, about 12 or whatever.
Well, Meg Ryan and Sharon Stone were, I think, offered this, or were considered for it. I'm not sure how close it got. And
neither of those are quite right, either.
Yeah, but more obvious, perhaps.
But Stone's not a comedienne. Meg Ryan could kind of do it, but I can't see her as a grifter.
Yeah, no, that's right.
So I'm then struggling. Who does that leave in the early mid 90s? Who would have been, I don't know, Jodie Foster must have been born in the early 60s if she was in Taxi Driver at like 13.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at literally the same age, let's say 30 to 32, we're looking at someone who was born in the early 60s, who is convincing as a grifter, fairly tough with great comic timing. It's quite a tough, for quite a slight role. It's actually quite a tough ask to cast this role.
I don't know, Michelle Pfeiffer maybe, or Annette Bening.
Michelle Pfeiffer's too fragile.
Yes, she is.
Although
she went very well with Mel.
Annette Bening, you might be onto something.
Well, she was an actual grifter in The Grifters, which we'll have to look at on another podcast because it's fantastic. Well, a very challenging movie. Yes, it's a very challenging.
Right, yeah, okay, we've just recast this with Annette Bening.
Yes, good.
There you go. Job done. High five, Jakes.
So, high five, back of the net. But the thing that really bothers me about Maverick is ultimately one of tone, because it starts with what it seems to be setting up quite a hard-edged action picture. You know, when he's...
It's all over the fucking shop.
Yeah, and you're getting the adrenaline. You're saying, right,
for
this
about
is...
20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then it is just silly scene after silly scene.
Yeah. And you don't know whether you're following an action hero, a villain, a chancer. I mean, maybe that's the whole point of Maverick, is he's all of those things, and you peel away the layers. But, you know, it's an innocuous, harmless film, but there are moments where, particularly with Alfred Molina as the bad guy, you think, God, if they'd just done it maybe harder edged and gone the Lethal Weapon route, you know, Lethal Weapon in the Wild West, wow, what it could have been. Having said that, it does sow the seeds, and Martin Campbell, by his own admission, said this, for Casino Royale, because it shows that you can use a card game as the centerpiece and have things happen around that are kind of connected to that without just it being a lecture on how to play poker or something. And that does work. So
not many people realise what a brave film Casino Royale is, and not just because it's a reboot and cast a very unusual looking guy as Bond. Not unusual again in a nasty way, just unusual as in so different.
Yeah.
But what's really brave about that film is it doesn't shy on the card scenes at all.
No.
It actually shoots them interestingly. They use a different technique. They use different lenses, different filming techniques each time to tell the story of each bit of the card game is in a different way. That's brave, and it's always brave to put things like that in films, because cards can be fascinating, card games can be fascinating, but let's not kid ourselves, the majority of the public couldn't give a shit.
Yes. What else is this fascinating for? I suppose because it's Mel Gibson at the beginning of the end of one phase. He's 38 here. A year later, he's making Braveheart. You then get some darker fare with Ransom and so on. There's a bit of a sidestep into Lethal Weapon 4, and then it's the beginning of the end, sort of the Passion Project, which is Passion of the Christ, and then the real kind of goes off the rails and is exiled for a bit phase.
You've just covered a lot of years, though.
Yeah.
There.
But this is him. This is Mel at his peak. This is Mel Gibson at peak movie star, if you like, I suppose.
Yeah, okay.
You know, likable and affable, comedic, but also physical. He's not. I mean, you have a thing about age and the idea of once you're creeping into your 40s, you're kind of finished. But you know.
No, I never said on a bit. That's totally putting words in my mouth. I've never said anything of the fucking type.
You are sensitive to the aging process.
I am sensitive to playing age appropriate, actually.
Right.
But I've never said in your early 40s you're finished. I'm quite happy to see Bonds in their early 50s, provided they don't go too much beyond that.
Yes.
In the classic interpretation of the character, if you want to age the character, that's fine.
Yeah.
But that brings with it dangers, because that means every new Bond is literally a reboot, because you've got to reset his age.
Right.
Whereas if you pretend Bond is just Bond and ignore the fact that Roger Moore is now 15 years too old to be playing it, when you next go in and it's Timothy Dalton, it's the same man, just take our word for it.
Yeah.
That's where I'm sensitive. At this point, I've got no problem with anyone here. I mean, this is not an inherently physical role. You can still be extremely charming well into your 50s and 60s. Had this been a different type of film, not a different type of film, had the outcome of this film been very different, and we'd had 4 Maverick sequels that had taken him through to like 52, 53 years of age, I'd have had no problem with that at all. Mel Gibson, maybe not so much now, but had he not come with the baggage that he now has on him, could he have made this film now? Possibly. I think he might be slightly too old for it, because there's still a romantic lead element to it.
Well, of course, was considered for Bond, wasn't he?
At no point in any of this was his age an issue. I mean, at 38, it wouldn't be. Because, again, to use the Bond analogy, at 38, you're only kind of around the age Bonds get cast anyway.
Yeah, well, he was offered it. I mean, he was certainly offered it twice. We know he was offered it, I think, for the Living Daylights. And he was offered it for...
Yeah, that's all conjecture. That's all conjecture.
He was certainly offered it he wasn't offered GoldenEye, but I think around 1993 when Cubby was sort of kind of nominally still involved.
McClory wanted him.
So did Connery, actually. Connery, there's an interview with Connery from Never Say Never Again where he cites Mel Gibson specifically, where he sort of says, "Look, this is the guy who should probably be Bond now, and I should be M." And there's an alternate universe where I think that would be an interesting thing to watch, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, normally Antipodean actors, Australia, New Zealand, they can nearly always do pretty decent British accents.
Yeah.
They just can. It's something that just seems to go with the gig. Whenever I know at one time there was talk of Hugh Jackman.
Yeah.
And it never bothered me because it was, but he's an Australian. I'm like, fine. Australians can do British accents. It doesn't bother me at all. If it's Hugh Jackman, it's Hugh Jackman. My favourite film's got an Australian. My favourite of the series has got an Australian actor in it. It doesn't bother me.
Right. That's Her Majesty's Secret Service for the uninitiated.
Yeah. George Lazenby, Australian. I hesitate to say actor, but he's still fantastic in it.
Of course, another Bond connection. Didn't Roger Moore play Maverick on television?
Roger Moore was because Maverick was kind of like a shifting focus between episodes. You have Brett Maverick and another one, and I forget which. James Garner was Brett. And then I get a bit confused, but at some point Roger Moore came into it as like a third brother or something like that, and he was in the last sort of season or two, is my vague memory. Roger Moore looks all wrong for this, frankly. I know he played a lot of cards as Bond, but he's a bit too formal somehow for this.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, in theory, it's cast really well, and I don't say that as any... I don't mean as an interpretation of the TV series, because I never really saw the TV series. But just what we're being presented here as a character, Mel Gibson's actually perfect for.
Yes.
Jodie Foster's slightly imperfect for, but is okay. Alfred Molina's perfect for his role. He's good at that sort of thing. So it could have been really good, but it just has no point. Because if someone says, no one's going to scream for a sequel to this, because there's nothing really that memorable about it.
Yeah.
It's just sort of scene after scene, really, and the scenes in and of themselves are likeable enough.
Yeah, they're sort of self-contained skits, including one that stands out and still stands out for me if we're talking about the politics of it. They take the piss out of the whole, what was then in fashion to sort of have a Native American, or rather as now called First American, sidekick. And it's Graham Greene, who was in Dances with Wolves and was then in Die Hard with a Vengeance. And that bit where he goes... Yeah, the tourists, they want you to do the whole, hey, how noble, savage, how white man thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how they think we talk.
Yeah,
sort of
loved it. But that's, speaking of Roger played another role, of course, the Saint. And have you seen the Val Kilmer version?
No, I haven't. And it was, I'm not quite sure why.
Was it because people thought it was a bit shit? At the time.
It could be, only in as much as if you don't get to opening weekend, you are then very subject to word of mouth. And word of mouth on this was awful.
Yes.
But I remember seeing trailers around, it would have been on the film show, the Barry Norman film show, there were like things building into this.
And why not?
And I'd seen Batman Forever by then, and I wasn't the biggest lover of that, and I really wasn't the biggest Val Kilmer fan at this point. And now I've sort of made peace with him, in that, like, if a film's got Val Kilmer in it, it doesn't particularly offend me generally. He's okay, and he's actually been really, really good in things. He was fantastic in Tombstone, but and other things if I thought about it, but certainly Tombstone springs to mind.
Yeah.
But Batman Forever, I'd found him really bland after Keaton, and Keaton's a fairly small actor, physically and in projection. But he was really, I know people who've seen Beetlejuice might argue with that, but generally speaking, he can play very sort of, almost like a quiet presence in films. But even allowing for that, I just found him this big, weird, rubbery-lipped kind of actor that had this horrendous, toxic reputation for behaving certain ways on sets and to people. And so, whilst I've never tended to make moral judgments about anyone, frankly, but particularly actors, in that I've always tried to sort of separate the people from the art. That's getting ever more difficult, as you know, as evidenced by conversations around Woody Allen the week where they're discussing this. 25 years this man's worked with nary a backlash, and this week it's like we must boycott the guy. I have no comment on whether I think that's right or wrong, but there's something about certain people where I don't like them that much anyway.
Yeah.
That if I start finding out they're real assholes, I'm kind of a bit less likely to patronise their stuff. And the Saint looked like a real vanity project from a guy that had basically been booted from Batman for being an asshole on it. And, you know, so he turns up on The Saint, which is not, I'm sorry, it's not James Bond, and it ain't Batman either. So I just didn't get the point of all this. Then I saw a few trailers, and it looked really shit.
Yeah.
And I just thought, this has got disaster written all over it. It really does look terrible.
Sure.
Funnily enough, the director of it's done some decent stuff, though. Philip Noyce did...
Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger.
Well, yeah, I was actually going to go back a little bit further and start with Dead Calm.
Yeah.
Which is a film hardly anyone seems to have seen.
I've seen it.
I know you have. You've got a bit hot for Nicole Kidman.
Oh,
but
bless.
it's a slightly miscast Nicole Kidman in that she's married to... what's he called?
Sam Neill.
Sam Neill.
Yeah. Not in real life,
in
in the film.
in age and everything else, but Billy Zane they go on a boat after her daughter's died. Their daughter's died in a car accident.
Right.
Their daughter, being like a toddler, has died in a car accident. They go on this boat for rest and recuperation, and Billy Zane comes aboard off like a shipwreck or something and ends up to be not quite what he seems. And it's a really decent, tense little thriller. But as you say, he went on to do Patriot Games, he went on to do Clear and Present Danger. But even further on, I mean, he did this, then he did The Bone Collector, which is a singularly boring film.
Yeah.
But he went on and did The Quiet American with Michael Caine and Brendan Fraser in about 2002. And that's really pretty good too. The guy had some ability. I'm really surprised this turned out as bad as it did, by all accounts. That said, I haven't seen it, James, so tell me about it.
It is a typical, you mentioned typical 90s aesthetic. This is like an A to Z of 90s tropes. We're going to do a separate podcast on this, it's also on the list, about the idea of post-Cold War, Hollywood starts panicking. They try looking for bad guys. And they really, they have a little experiment with, they can't quite say the IRA because they don't want to alienate the Irish. So he was way too psycho for the IRA was a phase where they went through. So they get bored of doing that because, of course, the IRA were such nice people who didn't hurt a fly. But, they would come up with villains who were outside a terror group, or he's not in any Arab terrorist organization. He's way more psycho than all the Arab terrorists. So they try the Arabs then, but that offends people. And then they say it's unrealistic until, sadly, 9/11.
Yeah, I remember by the time of 24 in like 2002 or 3, like its second or third season, you'd have the president talking to like his cabinet or whoever, or in whatever their situation room.
Yeah.
And he'd be talking about the 3 Middle Eastern countries.
Yes.
But they would never name them.
No.
You didn't want to offend any real ones, and
No.
you didn't want to make any up either.
So then they tried...
It was a real awkward phase, yeah.
So then they tried Colombian drug lords, but the problem with that is... The problem with Colombian drug lords is that they have quite a limited agenda, as they worked out. So they thought, what can we possibly do? And then into Hollywood's lap drops this amazing thing, which is, actually, post-Cold War Russia is just as scary and brilliant and full of bad guys, which means that we can have the Russian police or whatever, or the Russians as the good guys, but looking for bad guys. So all the Cold War imagery, all the threats of nukes and that sort of thing. And The Saint has that. So they've got Russian villains, which is a trope of the time. They've got a soundtrack which is actually fantastic. The score by Graham Revell, or Revell, I don't know how you say it, is available, I think, in some bootleg copies. I have an actual copy of it from years ago. It's fantastic. The soundtrack itself, terrific. Orbital do a cover version. That was another trope. Let's do a new cover version of an old TV show theme. But there's a lovely one by Duran Duran as well, which is at the end of it. And Sneaker Pimps. Sneaker Pimps' tune, Six Underground, has a little hint of the Goldfinger. A few bars from John Barry's Goldfinger score in it. Blink and you'll miss it. The shots, atmospherically, just in terms of scenery, are beautiful. They shoot Oxford in a way that I think is rivaled only by my best favourite episodes of Inspector Morse. It really does bring it to life. And it was 97. It was obviously in fashion, because Bond goes there in Tomorrow Never Dies.
Best cinematography I've seen since 1980s ITV.
No, I don't. Not literally, but 97, the same year, Bond ends up in Tomorrow Never Dies in the same college, New College.
Same cinematographer did, he did several, the same cinematographer works with Martin Campbell, so he did GoldenEye, he did The Mask of Zorro, etc., but he also did Casino Royale.
Yeah, and of course this was...
Edge of Darkness with Mel Gibson.
Yes, so it's all very connected. But this was the year I actually applied.
And The Fourth Protocol with Pierce Brosnan.
So it is connected. But this was the year I applied to Oxford, so I guess maybe sentimentally or whatever it was in my head. As a performance from Val Kilmer, and I do take into account all that you said, and to be fair, Val himself...
The funny thing is, like I say, I look back now, don't particularly dislike Val Kilmer, but I had something on me about him back then.
But we were programmed to dislike him at the time. I, however, at the time hero worshipped him because he'd been Batman, and because of my affinity with Batman, I thought he was very cool. And there was something about the way the guy moved. He has a kind of an almost balletic grace about him in certain shots, and he's got great comedic timing when he wants to have it. So the great thing about the Saint, Dave, is that you get him at his action peak. Once again, this is Val. I think he's about 36, 37 making this. And
that'd be about right, because I'm pretty sure he's 35 when he played Batman, so yeah, that'd be about right.
Yeah, and he has, so you get all that kind of balletic grace to the action, but you get really, and I mean good comedy. Do you remember the Sacha Baron Cohen character, Bruno?
Yeah.
There is a scene in this, and this is several years before Bruno.
One of the funniest sex scenes ever committed to films in Bruno.
Yes. It's not for everybody, but...
It's not for everyone, because it's two men, but it's really fucking funny.
Yeah, but there is a scene in the same...
It's not one of those things you'll find that distasteful, because it's just being outrageous and funny.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it has a lot of outrageous stuff in it, but there's, like, the interview with Harrison...
Yeah, but it's not but it isn't homoerotic, is it?
No.
It's not like closet homophobes are going to watch this going like, ugh!
Going to watch The Saint, or going to watch Bruno, closet homophobes?
Probably.
Well, both. Well, anyway, there's a scene where he plays a German homosexual called Bruno. And it's very like the Sacha Baron Cohen Bruno that came a couple of years later. And he basically starts coming on to the baddies.
That's 12 years later, but we'll continue.
Well, he starts coming on to the baddies in this camp homosexual German character. Quite how he got away with it, I don't know. And he plays a Jim Morrison type with long hair, kind of South African, which is what the Saint actually was. I only realised this recently. Leslie Charteris's vision of Simon Templar, apparently, wasn't this kind of George Sanders, Roger Moore type, although there was an element of that. He was a classic gentleman and a gentleman thief, but I think his lineage is that sort of Dutch Boer, Scots kind of... there's a certain class of quasi-Brit, and they have this kind of Dutch, South African sort of... It's I can't even describe it precisely, but that's what I think Kilmer was aiming for. And of course, Kilmer himself...
When you started with Dutch, South African, I did think, he can't describe this.
Yeah, but you know what I mean.
I'm not surprised.
You know what I mean,
not at all. You've lost me.
You'll Google it after the show, or I'll put it in I'll stick it in the show notes. It's a sort of there's a lineage of sort of very classy, outdoors friendly action man South African, who actually has a kind of a Dutch lineage, pre-apartheid. Many of them opposed apartheid, incidentally, and were instrumental in its downfall. And that's, I think, what Kilmer was overthinking. Because one of the things about Val is that he wanted to be Brando, which is another reason apparently he was behaving so badly, was he was thinking this is what method actors do.
Well, The Island of Dr. Moreau is one of his most famous dysfunctional shoots. In the stories around both, we had him and Brando together.
Yeah.
The stories around the behaviour on that set just went a long way to leading to this toxicity around him, because this is almost the last hurrah for Val Kilmer. I mean, if you look up, I'm going to do it now actually, if you look up Val Kilmer's career,
yes,
it peaks with Batman, depending on what you describe as a peak, of course, because it's not necessarily the most artistically valid thing you'll ever do.
Valid.
But obviously, in terms of what's the word? Box office clout, certainly. You don't get much bigger than Batman. He did that in 95. He did Heat the same year. The following year, you've got The Island of Dr. Moreau and Ghost in the Darkness. And then the following year, you've got this. And then I am struggling to find really big hit films after that.
Yeah.
There's a couple of very critically lauded films like Wonderland, where he played John Holmes. I remember that. And there's obviously Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which is wonderful, but that's not a peak Val Kilmer in terms of box office clout anymore. So ironically, his behaviour on The Island of Dr. Moreau the previous year, and the fact that he'd basically been seen to, whether he did or not's a different matter, but been seen to shit on the Batman franchise in order to do this vanity project that didn't turn out very well, this kind of killed his career.
Yeah. But to be fair to him...
There's a lot of credits after this, but they're not worth shit in terms of clout, box office clout.
No.
He's no longer an A-lister after this.
That's right. I mean, well, partly because the film flopped, and it flopped without much competition or expectation around it. To be fair to him, it had been floating around Hollywood a long time. A number of actors had been offered it to the extent that it would have been a vanity project for whoever, because it was one of those things that was floating around Paramount as in, who's our star du jour? We need to create a new action franchise. And I think the idea was they wanted a quasi-Tom Clancy thriller with a dash of Indiana Jones sort of romance, and maybe even a hint, possibly further on down the line, not so much of the supernatural, but certainly of the mystical. Hence the idea of going into this... The premise is that he's a gentleman thief who takes Catholic saints' names to cover his tracks and his crimes. It was offered to Mel Gibson, once again, and he had some conversations. Arnold Schwarzenegger, of all people.
Ludicrous. I'd just pick a big name.
Oh, yeah. Ralph Fiennes turned it down, but ended up doing the Avengers, which is worse. And when I say Avengers, I don't mean the nice Marvel one. I mean, we can cover that at a later date.
We mean John Steed never Peel.
Yes, and he really... Which Shane Black apparently is going to bring back, which would be interesting. But they...
So I've heard.
And finally they went to Hugh Grant. And Hugh thought about it,
and
he had some meetings. Well, he himself said, look, I'm not an action hero. Even though that same year he kind of tried to dip his...
With Extreme Measures.
With Extreme Measures, yeah, which is a similar...
Which is actually alright. He's a miscast, but it's a decent film.
It's basically The Firm, and plays on the fact that Hugh is a little bit like Tom Cruise. In the same way as The Saint plays on the idea that Val Kilmer was once Tom Cruise's, because this came out the year after Mission Impossible. It's trading on very similar visual themes and tropes and so on, whilst being a little bit up itself and presuming, a bit like Maverick, the same mistake, inverting its own mythology before it set one up, presuming that people know this legendary character like he's Bond or someone, when of course he isn't, because you have to reset the template again in order to establish that kind of goodwill. It should have been a franchise, though, because it sets up the possibility of further adventures. Elizabeth Shue is divine in it, and she wears this sort of black jacket and boots combo, which at the time was it was the look of 1997. And watching this movie is like watching 97. There's a sense of energy about it and promise, for all of its flaws. There's a lot of filler in there. There's actually some gratuitous violence. There's a bit where he self-harms in an alley, which I still to this day don't understand why they put in. There are some unnecessary murders by the villains that don't even make any logical sense to their own plans. And it thinks it's being edgy by having references to drugs and so on, when in fact it's just more filler. However, for sentimental reasons, as in where I was at that point, I love it. For the score, the atmospherics, it's one of those movies, a bit like Maverick you mentioned. I can stick this on if I'm doing the house or something, and I can have it on in the background without watching it, but I'll check in every few minutes and say, I love that scene, or I love that bit. And, it's worth a watch. It's not, it's not groundbreaking. It's not even hugely memorable as kind of an action-adventure epic, but as a signature of its time, if you're interested
Nobody knows what to do with this franchise, do they? It was huge. No. It was really big with Roger Moore.
Yeah.
And when I was very young, Ian Ogilvy brought it back with the Return of the Saint. So when I picture the Saint, I don't pick Roger Moore, I picture him, but that's because I was so young when that was around. And some of that reruns, but I can remember the Return of the Saint.
Yeah.
But since then, you've had this film, which was an aborted false start. You had it's on Netflix. I don't know if it's a Netflix original.
Yeah, don't even bother. It's so badly.
What I'm trying to say, every now and again, they'll have another go at it and screw it up, and you think it's not that hard. The same man went on to play James Bond. There's enough crossover appeal between the two that it should be quite a no-brainer.
But therein lies the problem, insofar as the thing is, when James Bond was in, to the extent that there are some people who accused Ian Fleming of basically taking Simon Templar and taking him to work for MI6, that's spectacularly unfair. If Fleming took from anyone, he took from Bulldog Drummond. But anyway, that's a different story, a different podcast. But what I'm saying is...
literary James Bond is not really anything like Simon Templar.
No, but he makes Simon Templar kind of redundant by his very existence, if you like, because the tropes, in the same way as...
Yes, but in the same way as you can't have Batman on television because it damages the whole proper... Forget Gotham, because that's not the full
that's just nothing. That's
yeah, I know, but I'm just aware of what I've just said. We do have a Batman-related television show at the moment.
Yeah.
But you can't have Batman on TV, really. I think it would be best suited, actually. You think of that Dark Knight universe and aesthetic. that would have worked as a sort of almost TV procedural quite well.
That's what Gotham was supposed to be, incidentally, before they went and stuffed it up.
Before they fucked it up, yeah. but there are other analog characters with some of the same things that you can do, because maybe they're not quite they don't have the right iconography of the screen. So we've got Daredevil on TV.
Yeah.
And I think, well, okay, we're not going to get a James Bond television series, and I don't care what studio buys it, by the way. No one would be that stupid. Not the full-fat MI6 James Bond, no. Young Bond possibly.
Yeah.
And you think, well, you've tried and failed to get the same on the big screen, so they can coexist because they're servicing slightly different markets. TV is where you do the same now. It's where it was born. It's where it's made its name. This whole gentleman thief aesthetic lends itself to the kind of episodic anyway.
Yeah.
But not only that, if you're a thief, you can have people after you, and that can be like a running narrative through things as well. So I don't think they need compete. I can see why they tried to do it on the big screen.
Yeah.
But the fact you've tried to do it on the big screen once or twice doesn't mean that's where you have to continue to keep trying it.
No. But, but as I say, as a movie, it is a good time capsule of what Kilmer could have been. That he could have been a really great leading man. It comes out as well around the same time as a film called The Ghost and the Darkness, which is, once again, worth another podcast in itself. A much underrated movie. Dave, one of the reasons I have such high standards for action heroes, which are much documented, when I watch Val in action, literally in action, The Ghost and the Darkness, I believe that this is a person that can handle a weapon, that can run through a field of fire, whatever it is. And interestingly enough, this is a little trivia point. Behind the scenes of Heat, obviously all the actors for that movie had to have weapons training. I think with Andy McNabb, was it the ex-SAS guy? The one good story about Kilmer that did circulate at the time was they said there are a lot of wannabe action heroes out there, a lot of actors who try and look the part. They said Kilmer is one of those. Not only did I this real-life action hero said, not only did I believe him, but I would have practically recruited him for real-life combat. That's how good he was. And it wasn't one of those bullshit stories that we were talking about earlier on that actors have spread about themselves or don't, shall we say,
so you can, not always, but you can often tell the difference.
Yeah, and I think Kilmer is credible.
I know, for example, completely unrelated, but I know Jake LaMotta was deeply, deeply impressed with De Niro.
Yeah.
De Niro's boxing on Raging Bull. And I believe all that. That doesn't strike me as a man who would bullshit or had any reason to bullshit. When he says he could have been a professional fighter at a high level, I go, I can believe that. Yeah. If Jake LaMotta's saying that, I can believe that. And I think the same is probably true here. You get a smell for it sometimes. Usually, if it's some bullshit that comes out in a junket, it's just that.
Yes. Well, this wasn't that. And I think he could have been a bigger star. He could have been even a better Batman had he given it time. The Saint, had it been a franchise, who knows? And career renaissances can come just out of the blue when anyone least expects them.
The problem with Val Kilmer now is he's had throat cancer.
Which he only just admitted.
He's admitted it now because he denied it for a long time.
As you would.
Well, when I say he's admitted it now, I must stress, I think these people have a right to privacy on personal health matters.
Oh, totally.
We've got no right to know. It's privacy, not secrecy. Having said that, he did deny it publicly a while back.
Sure.
But he has admitted to a 2-year battle with throat cancer. And he's now reduced to a bit of a rasp and shortness of breath. So his... even if his health holds up, and God willing it does, his scope for making a comeback is going to be somewhat limited.
I'd like to see him paired with...
But there are plenty of more artistically rich... He may not have stayed an A-lister for much longer because of various matters, but the aforementioned Wonderland, the aforementioned Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, there's still plenty of good Val Kilmer product out there. Because actually, the man, when you watch his Batman, if that's all you ever see of him, you think he was this bland, stoic presence. Val Kilmer had such range because he was funny as well.
Yeah.
Val Kilmer could do pretty much anything.
He was good.
He was better than anyone ever thinks he is.
He had a lovely wife in Joanne Whalley. Joanne Whalley who was Joanne Whalley Kilmer for a bit. You remember from The Singing Detective?
Well, yeah, she made her name as Joanne Whalley in The Singing Detective. She met him on the set of Willow, married him very soon afterwards, and then almost immediately did Scandal, the Christine Keeler film.
Yes.
With funnily enough, John Profumo is played by Ian McKellen in that film.
Yes.
Which is really odd casting now I think about it, just 'cause it's just on look.
Yes.
It's nothing else. But she was Joanne Whalley-Kilmer in that, so her most iconic image, which is the recreation of the Keeler sort of sat on that chair shot,
yes,
and her most iconic, well-known performance was as Joanne Whalley-Kilmer.
And he did, he has always combined well with even, even actors in a small role. Alan Armstrong turns up in The Saint, who's a British actor, I suppose the closest we have to to a Tommy Lee Jones or whatever, and he's in that inspector role who's pursuing the Saint.
He's not tough in the same way as Tommy Lee Jones, but he is kind of stoic.
And the scenes between Kilmer and Armstrong are great there. So yeah, I kind of recommend it. I recommend it as a curiosity. It's probably the weakest in retrospect of the 4 movies. Not that there's necessarily a hierarchy at work, but all of them are united by this thread of the idea that the gentleman thief as a hero is something that Hollywood likes because it manages to give you the best of both worlds, a bit of escapism. It's crime, but it's crime without consequence.
But it's not really going to hurt anyone that badly, honest.
Yeah. Which wouldn't if only life were like that.
And actually, there's a heart of gold under it all, really, which is kind of something hard to sell if their crime was shooting people in the face or something. So,
yes.
Yeah.
So
I can see the appeal of these.
So where does that leave us for the next one? I have pitched you the idea of...
I don't think we have finished with... We might have finished with The Gentleman Thief.
Yeah.
But I think certainly we can sackcloth it down a bit.
Who are you talking about, Dave?
Talking about Robin Hood.
Of course. Now, there is a new Robin Hood coming out this year. Taron Egerton.
I've seen, they look the cleanest, most stylish...
well, he's a great actor to watch. I
genuinely think he is. I think Taron Egerton has a very, very special career ahead of him.
Yeah, lovely bloke.
I'm a bit worried by the aesthetic I'm seeing in his shots so far.
Yes, well, it could turn out being...
But you're going to give me an opportunity to see 3 new things here, because we're going to cover Robin Hood and we're going to cover a couple of King Arthur
That's
films.
right. So which Robin Hoods are we doing? We're doing Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves?
Well, no, let's go back a little bit further, because the first one I have not seen.
Right.
So I had to insist on 1976 Robin and Marion.
Right.
Richard Lester directed it,
yes.
Director of Hard Day's Night and a couple of the Superman films and also a couple of the Musketeer films. But it's also, the funny thing is, I'll skip the middle Robin Hood film in a minute just to cut to the end. This was a 46-year-old Sean Connery playing a sort of end of his career Robin Hood, if you like, alongside Audrey Hepburn in that film?
Yes.
I've not seen it. I'm going off what I've heard of it. The funny thing is, the last Robin Hood film we're going to cover also has a 46-year-old leading man, and it's an origin story. So we're going to cover the 2010 Robin Hood as well, just because that's a much wider take on the character. He doesn't really become Robin Hood till the end. Having said that, I laughed out loud in the cinema a couple of times at bits that weren't meant to be funny. So I don't know how positive I'm going to be 8 years on. In the middle of that, obviously, we will cover Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, because that's probably the most commercially successful Robin Hood film. In the King Arthur arena, I've not seen either of them. Now, I've got these all in my calendar, because I have to watch them at a certain schedule in order to be able to...
comment.
Able to get in time to record it.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I look at my calendar now, it doesn't matter what day, I haven't necessarily got them in order either. But on one day I'm watching, it says Robin and Marion, and then it says Prince of Thieves, and on another day it says King Arthur 2005. And then I've got somewhere I should have, although I can't readily see it, I should have the 2010 Robin Hood. Next Friday I am watching what I call, I've got the 2005 King Arthur film, which is the one with Clive Owen in it. Yep. So I'll do well to stay awake there, thanks to his voice. But I'll do my best. But next Friday, I will be watching what is in my calendar as King Arthur Mockney Twat version.
Fucking King Arthur, you fucking hell. You are taking
we'll be watching last year's Guy Ritchie version, and I'm not particularly a Guy Ritchie fan. But let's see what I make of it.
Well, Dave, as ever, it's been emotional. Give us a shout for where else we can find you.
You can find me at the Pasty Kid 1976 on Twitter. You can find my show, Do You Expect Us to Talk, at Expect Us to Talk on Twitter, or facebook.com/Expect Us to Talk.
And you can now find PolitFlix itself on its own YouTube channel and Twitter. So you guys who want to take down Movie Viral still, not going to happen, because we might grow separately. All right. Well, lots of love. It's been great fun. Thank you for listening. Thank you for contributing, Dave. And until the next time, take care. God bless. Bye now.
Good night, everyone.